first thing is, so the drug that will damage HDL more than anything else is Primo.
God damn
Primo
it.
is very mild. Primo is mild in every other aspect apart from what it does to HDL. And part of that is its anti-estrogen mechanism that causes HDL to go so low. Mast will be second one.
I'm like, well, I can't help that, but I'm telling you that's not a normal antivirus mod. But the amount of people messaging and getting butthurt over it was insane just off that. Never mind a proper lab test.
I always ended up in a punch up because of it with the Falcon Fitness lot, remember?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, people don't want to think that they've made a bad choice. So they'll defend things even if they really aren't in a position to do so. And they're not. It's like when someone slags off your ex, you sort of jump to their defense. You're not defending your ex, you're defending your decision to be with them. Otherwise, you've got to admit, well, yeah, I was a dick. I picked a fucking idiot and spent 3 years with an absolute Fruit Loop. You know what I mean? And so your automatic response is to defend that decision, isn't it? So you get a lot of that, but it is what it is. So like I say, I want to be very, very careful with it. But the good news that we have is that because of the connections I have with Leeds and Liverpool and Manchester University.
Just so you know, Dave, we are live, just in case you didn't see the countdown, that's all. Just so
it's fine. No. So we're going to have them in the background, which sort of quantifies what we do a little bit, because we've got proper research, establishments working with us. And I've also got a contract pending with the Dutch government as well for the lab. So,
nice.
So it just makes everything a lot more legit and correct. You know what I mean?
When it comes to cost as well, like what would the cost be to kind of send off a vial to get it tested?
One arm, a part of a leg. We're probably looking at about 49 quid for a vial.
Oh, fucking bargain, mate. That's a bargain.
I was thinking like 200 quid.
No, I mean, we want to be. The thing is, it will be. We're not too sure yet because we need to do the dry runs. We need to do the time. The system's capable of doing. The actual testing side is quite automated once it's set up. The time-consuming bit is more preparing the samples. So we have a 200 tray sampler. So we can fill 200 samples. They go in the machine, they start running, and then you're prepping the next set of samples for the next run. So it first identifies it, and then it goes through the second part of the machine, which then determines its strength. That's a very oversimplified version of it, but that's effectively what happens. But it's so sensitive, and it's so complex. The amount of parts we've had to replace, and stupid little piece of tube pipe that's like that long and that thick, and it's 200 odd quid. It's just fucking ridiculous. But it is what it is. So, and we're sort of that far into it now with no choice but to come out the other side.
And no one else is doing it in the UK. Like you've not got competition. So
it's a huge market for manufacturers as well, isn't there? Like, imagine if they want to prove how good their gear is. Like, that's a huge market.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing with it is, I didn't even realize how much work it was going to be setting this up and how complex it was going to be and how difficult it was going to be. And I've got contacts in LGC testing labs. I've got contacts with the police for testing. I've got contacts with Birmingham University for testing. I even spoke to Wedinos testing department. I mean, they don't do steroids anymore, but the kit's still there. The people are still there. And no one had a set sort of formula for preparing samples and solutions, and because the first thing you got to do is get the hormone out of suspension. So, and that you've got to do that in a way that doesn't affect the result, damage the hormone in any way. And just coming up with that solution was we didn't have anywhere to go, so we had to try various chemicals at various solutions until we found one that worked.
How do you do it, Dave? If you don't mind saying, is that something you can?
It's not that I don't mind saying. I don't actually know the full details of it because I'm not the one that's been doing it. To be quite honest with you, it's a mix of. There's somewhat. It's a diluted version of a chemical, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I could find out, but I'd have to ask Paul who runs the machine.
It has to be a huge complex process because otherwise other people would have already been doing it.
Correct.
Because as soon as Dave mentioned this to me, the first thing I said was, you get that right, and it will be one of the most popular things on the planet, I think, personally.
So the machines operate in vacuum. So we have to turn the machine on 24 hours before we want to use it for it to vacuum down. And then there's a complex drainage system as well that has to be vented outside. We've had to knock holes in walls and build passageways from one room to another room to house compressors in one room separate because you can't have the compressor in near the machine because the vibration fluxes the machine. So, it's a lot more involved than people think. And silly little stuff. And like the columns only have so long and, you start with a certain size column, which basically is it's how fast the particles pass or what size the particles pass through. And different size columns you use for different compounds. And that's the other thing. It's just like, because people say, oh, well, you test GH. Well, the machine's capable of it, but it would mean stripping it down, replacing the column, recalibrating everything, resetting it up to just test GH. So the simple answer is, for this point, no. When we can afford to put a second machine in, then we can dedicate a machine to growth. But you can't really swap between, though the machine is capable of testing anything you want it to test, the setup is so different for everything you want to do and requires so many parts being changed that what you do is you set them up to do one thing. So it will test steroids and that's it. And then if we do move into doing growth, it will be a separate machine that does that. But that's 12 months, 18 months at least down the line.
Is it a similar machine to Janosik?
It will be.
Or similar format?
Yeah, my understanding, I believe there was a guy before him, there was a guy up in Scotland or somewhere that was doing it, and he was a lab tech at a university. And it's effectively the same kit. The only difference, some aspect LCMS, but the only difference is ours is probably a little bit of an older model, but we've had it fully refurbed, so everything's been gone through, parts being changed, and it's been updated. But it'll be exactly the same kit to some extent. It might be a bigger machine, a faster machine, or a bigger sample tray. But other than that, the basics are the same. There is potential over the next couple of years for the testing to be done through like a UV breakdown analysis. That's quite interesting because those machines are actually relatively cheap and they're very versatile. But as yet, they haven't got one that's able to do anabolics. But I have spoke to the company about it, and they do think it's not that far off. So I will be keeping my eye on that because if that happens, we'll probably move into that stuff just because it's so much more maintenance free.
I honestly just think it's going to be such a popular thing in the UK because for me, the way Jordan is, Kuba is, the way we are, the way me and Riz and Deck and drive ourselves insane with, well, is this real? Is this not? And then how people skew their blood work results because we get them tested on different days compared to when they're injected and stuff. I think this will blow minds at how popular it is personally. I really do.
Well, we've actually had a few labs contact us already because I know there's been testing companies in the past that have refused to work with labs. Yeah. And we've had a few labs, and I said, look, it's as simple as this. You go on the website, you book a test. It's a reference number. I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are. It's completely anonymous. When your result comes back, you go to the site, you put in your reference number in the box, and your results come up.
End of.
You can either give people that reference number, and they can go on the site and check the results at the pure space for themselves, or you could take a screenshot or print it off and do what you want with it. I don't care. But that's it. There's going to be, and we have to be a little bit careful, obviously, at the end of the day. There are certainly, and if we want to be considered serious by educational bodies and research bodies, then we have to make sure we stay professional with that. And so that's effectively it. You buy a test, you get a reference number, you either send it in or a sample kit sent out to you, and then that reference number, you access your results a few days later when you get an email saying they're ready.
It definitely makes sense to me that way, because I think as well, what we were on about before about people saying, oh, well, such and such said this, or we don't believe that. As soon as you start doing testing for labs, people will then say, oh, well, are you linked with them, or are they paying you to do this?
Yeah.
But I think exactly how you just explained it there just gets you away from all that. Obviously, you are still going to have idiots that will make up those rumours, because people make up rumours about everything. But I think exactly how you just described it there seems to be the most logical, clear-cut way of doing it. Doesn't matter who you are, get your reference code, crack on.
Yeah, I mean, we're employing staff. I'm not going to be at the machine. The machine's over 100 miles away from where I am. And it's over 100 miles away from where I live. And we're having clinical staff run the stuff because I just want to be completely separate from it in that sense. But even then, I know there's going to be hate and I know there's going to be bullshit. And it's just a case of just ignoring it and not engaging with it. And eventually, Janosik went through this. They got a load of crap.
Oh, yeah.
But he's in a different country, so it's not really a big issue for him. And eventually it calmed down, and those that want to use him, and those that don't. And that's the bottom line. You know, if you want to use us, great. Do it. If you don't. I don't really give a flying fuck that way. This is for bigger things. This is more commercial based than it is actually everyday user based. And there's a big research back end to this as well, because we can pull data off it all the time. So we can start getting stats on, you know, what is the quality of gear that's out there. Not a case of what brand is good, just what is across the board. There's no brands recorded in any of the results. There's no branding whatsoever. We don't say label identified as, for argument's sake, ROM test. You know, it will just say label identified as testosterone, tested as so-and-so at this strength, and that's the end of it.
Which is, again, a great move up.
Sorry?
Will the test show any like impurities as well, like with the actual compound, like metals in there or anything like that?
I'm not sure. So how it works, it creates a graph. And every time something is detected, it's on a timeline. And things peak at different times with different molecular weights. And you read the molecular weight, which tells you what the compound is.
Yeah, it's like a mass spectrometry, because they all travel in speed. So just,
and we don't know yet until we start doing it on volume and start doing the dry runs, because all we've been using at the moment has been the pure samples we've got, which were a nightmare to get. But once we've moved on to a selection of actual gear that we've got off people, we can start to have a look and see what contaminants are in there and whether it's viable to report those contaminants or not. It might be just a case of there's 4 other unknowns in this sample, you know, non-steroidal unknowns in this sample, or it might be that we can identify them. I don't actually know at this point is the honest answer.
So
that may come later down the line.
Will it build like a picture of the compounds that you test? And as an example, let's say I bought a test in there and it has, let's say, EQ in there as an example. Will it flag that to show that there's boldenone in there rather than testosterone? Does that make sense?
So what it will do is you'll get a graph. And the easiest way is probably just to draw you a picture. Let me get a big piece of paper. So you'll get a graph, and the graph will probably look... Hang on, that's wrong. Excuse me. The graph will probably look something like that top picture.
Yeah,
and those high peaks will be anabolic compounds,
right?
And there'll be a numerical value to where that peak is.
Of course.
So say that as an atomic weight of 247, for argument's sake, and that might identify as test 10th, and that has an atomic value of 165, and that might be EQ. So you know from the numerical value on the peaks what compound it is.
Of course.
So and then the other peaks are other contaminants that are in there. Now, that could be benzyl alcohol, it could be the carrier oil, it could be benzobenzoate, or it could be shit. So until we start testing the non-filtered, non-pure compounds, we won't start to see the background noise to know what we're looking at there and whether it's significant or not.
I think what Deck was saying there as well is, say we send the bottle in that we say is test and unfit.
Yeah.
if it comes back and it's EQ instead, will that be fed back to us, or will it just say
Yes.
it's not tested?
Yes. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. We will identify. I mean, I'm actually at the point where I might say all samples must be blind. So you don't tell us what's in it. Because we will be identifying the sample anyway. So we don't need to know. The only thing that would be nice would be for the data collection, because obviously all we can then say is, yeah, this had EQ in it. We don't know it should have been tested. So we can't say for stats point of view, well, that was a compound that tested incorrectly.
And I think not only is that good for your research, but also I think for the bodybuilding or anabolic steroid user community, if then you put in research somewhere that shows most test is actually test, or actually most DECA is an EQ, that if that's published somewhere, that is good for the bodybuilding community to know as well. So we are getting the benefit of knowing the data as well, I suppose.
Look, if you're at a decent scale of volume, to produce a vial of testosterone is going to cost you somewhere between £3 and £6.
Yeah.
Depending on your scale of volume, right? You're selling that out at 25, 30 quid, depending on your brand. There might be somebody in between. So you might be trading that out at between 10 and 15, wholesaling that, retailing that at 25 to 30. There's enough money that labs don't need to cut corners. And quite a lot of labs have stepped forward and said, look, we really want to do this because we want to check our raws. We want to make sure we're getting proper stuff. We want to produce a good quality product. So if any lab kicking off about the quality being crap or about then the first question I've had, in any case, whether it was me running it or not, would be, what have you got to hide that you're so bothered about this?
Yeah. Definitely.
Because if you're doing a right job, even if it did test shit, well, I know it's right. So why do I give a shit? And
Dave, would it be possible, for example, let's just say you've got a lab owner, he's got raws for test and anthe. He sends you a small sample of that raw. You could just check that for the system to see exactly what it is before he even produces it.
Yeah.
So in essence, it's a bulletproof system then, isn't it?
Test and anthe, 20 grams, pure, 100% samples that I have to buy legitimately to use to test the machine.
Can I
Have you
get
had any dodgy rules yourself, Dave?
You can fuck off.
Go back to my brewing days.
That's going to make a lot of
honestly,
labs
mate,
step up their
fucking-
game as well. Like, a lot of labs are going to step up their game because they're going to go, well, a lot of our shit's going to be a lot more now.
It brings positives across the board, doesn't it? But like what Dave said, and I do think a lot of the labs don't want like the main ones. I can't imagine them wanting to put underdose stuff, badly dosed stuff, because they are so popular. So it can only be a benefit for everybody.
Look, there are several reasons why labs will sometimes push out subpar quality gear. One is genuine mistake. I know a lab that made me some femtest as a favour for a client friend. Only a small batch. He only made me 10 vials, but he made slightly more, and some of it got mixed up with his test prop. So some of his test prop went out that was actually femtest, and it was super low dosed. But he numerically batches everything he does. So as soon as the picture of the vials was sent to him, he was like, no, that's actually femtest. You shouldn't have been there. I fucked up. I made a mistake. I've seen people genuinely put wrong labels on stuff. Because, a lab wouldn't dish out a vial of Tren as mass. It's just not economically sound. So that's obviously a mislabeling situation. The raws generally, if they're from China, are pretty decent in the sense that they're usually within 95% purity of what they're supposed to be. If you start looking out like Eastern Bloc and India, then you start getting some fake raws and the quality can be pretty garbage. But the other thing as well is that happens, and I know labs do this, and I understand why they're in that position. They've got an order. They have resellers. They need to produce, let's say, 5,000 vials a week, 1,000 tests, 1,000 mass, 1,000 Primo, 510, 500 DECA, whatever it was. And one of their shipments gets stopped. It's very difficult for them to turn around and say their EQ didn't come in. It's very difficult for them to turn around to their customer base and go, right, we're not selling any EQ for 2 weeks because we haven't got any raw. let's just stick some test E in there and fire it out. We'll get away with it because it's only for a week or two, you know. So I'm not saying it's right, but you can understand how it comes about. I mean, it was either Master or Primo. There was no Master or Primo coming out of China for about 6 weeks. And quite a few labs turned around and said, I haven't got it anymore. I can't sell it. I haven't got it. But there were labs still selling it. Now, either they had huge stocks or they were pushing fucking Masteron out as the other, one as the other, and just doing what they could to get through the situation.
That was pretty recently, wasn't it?
I was going to say
that was last 3-4 months,
Yeah.
Dave, I was telling these, they were laughing at me. I reckon a lot of labs are putting Primo as Masteron 200 mgs. And they were saying to me that it's not feasible, but I think a lot of them were doing it because Primo's been so popular. I bet they've all stocked up on the Primo. Now everybody wants a Masteron.
Well,
you've got the Primo into it.
You've got to look at, I mean, go back 15 years, labs never sold to you. If I wanted to buy ROM, I had to go through somebody who was selling ROM. I could never go to the lab direct. Now, most labs, bar only a couple, will sell direct. They'll have a direct seller. So it gives the lab so much more profit margin to work with.
Yeah.
So they can afford to get through a jam if they want to maintain the quality and brand knowledge that they've got. You know, they want a reputation to stay. It would be a viable exchange. It'd be an expensive one, but they'd still make decent money. They just wouldn't make quite as much money as they would normally. I mean, it's very unique in the drug sales world that the wholesale manufacturer supplies to the end user. That doesn't happen in any other illicit drug market. For the simple reason as the suppliers want protection. They want layers in between them and the end user because the end user is the biggest risk to them. Because they've got no reason not to open their mouths if anything goes peaked on.
Yeah.
I just feel sorry for Riz. Riz is going to be fucking bankrupt in about 2 weeks from sending Dave 70 samples a day.
Yeah.
Is this one better than that one? Is that one better than this one? Is that one better than this one?
I'm gonna send my own shit in. I'm gonna send in all of the engineered alkalinity, all of it, and it will check.
Riz is going to send in a milk. Riz is going to send in a milk for every bottle.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's worth it.
Well, I mean, this is the other thing, and I shouldn't say this because I'm probably damaging my own business, but we're only testing the vial you send us.
Of course.
You know, there's the next vial could be completely different. And so you've got to sort of remember that. So all you can really do is see what the marketplace is doing in the sense of what other people are getting back from test results. And if 95% of people are saying that lab's good, then you've got a pretty good chance that for the most part it's going to be decent. Is any lab perfect? No, because there's mistakes. But there are, I mean, I know a few labs that are okay, but they still make mistakes and they still fuck up every now and again. Well, that's just human nature, unfortunately. You're working in an industry that's unregulated, uncontrolled. There's no quality control from the point from start to finish. It's... Go on.
Sorry, what I was just going to say is, then, like, one thing I do with all my clients, when I get blood results back, I ask them what lab they're using, if it's got batch numbers. And I tend to keep a collated sheet of what seems to be good at the time and what isn't. So
but you're a nerd.
Yeah, I know
it's
that.
Big nerd. Big nerd.
But what I was going to say is, the info that clients will get is something that either us as coaches or resellers or whatever could collate that information themselves from yourself, you know. And I don't mean get that from you. I mean, if they've got a value.
I at this moment, my initial opinion is that any data we collect is free for all to view.
Right.
What I'm unsure at the moment is how we'll put that data together and how we'll represent it. But I'm quite happy for the data to be, you know, open source, really, because I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be secret. There's no reason for it to be secret.
And I think that's the beauty of the manufacturers using it and the end user. Because, like you said, the manufacturer could send you a single good bottle, but the end user obviously is sending what they've purchased in. So you get a good representation of what is currently floating around the UK at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, any lab of any brains is going to send a legit batch in every time so they get the best testing. So, but if labs are sending us raws, then that's a different story because, you know, they're trying to test the pre-usage product to make sure they've got the right thing.
I suppose suppose you could go from there, Dave, in the sense of, do you set up either like a newsletter or a forum or something where you post the results or averages or whatnot?
Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do at the back. First of all, I need to see how we can pull the data out and how it's going to represent. The second thing we need to make a decision on is, are we going to ask for what it's supposed to be? If not, then all we're going to be able to provide is tested as EQ at this strength, tested as this at this strength, tested as this at this strength. And though that's still usable data, it's laborious to go through it and pull anything of any real value out of it. What we're better be able to do is say 85% of products tested as described, 75% of products tested below 5% variance on the strength they were supposed to be, or something of that nature.
Well, you could set up like a Patreon, like some sort of platform like that, and then charge £5 a month, and people that want to be on it, they can access it and they can say, this lab tested that, this, and this. And then that could be another sort of source of avenue. That's the income.
I'm not keen. I know this sounds stupid, but I'm not keen. The way we've costed it, the way we've priced it up, I'm quite happy with what we get for the testing. If we've got extra information, I'm happy to throw that into the marketplace free. My background's been harm reduction for 20 years. So for me, that's a good harm reduction tool because I'll be feeding that info into the unis and research departments anyway.
I do definitely think it would be better for all if we were telling you what we thought was in the bottle and then you could see whether it was or not. Or at least
even if we did it as a post-testing thing. So if we said, like, we test blind, so then no one can accuse us of favoritism or whatever. But when you get your results, there's a little box to fill in to say what it should have been.
Yeah.
So we can still collect the data, but we've tested blind, so there's none of that. Oh, well, you knew what it was anyway.
Yeah.
Like before you open the email, you can request like a...
Yeah. So it'll be enter your reference number, enter what the compound's supposed to be and what strength it's supposed to be. And it can be an optional thing. So you just put a little box and say, tick this if you want to enter compound and strength. And put underneath, this is for research purposes so that we can collect data on, what the quality of the market is. And I think initially there'll be a lot of people going, I'm not ticking that. But 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line, I think a lot of that suspicion will have gone and you'll start getting people, I've got no problem with this now. I'm happy to do it.
Then could you do it where? So currently you're charging £49, call it £50. But then, so for £50, when you do that, that's quite cheap. You get the data and you're allowed to share it. If you want your data to be private, well, it's £100.
There is the point. I think, to be honest, that because of the Data Protection Act and all the rules and regulations around that, even though the testing is anonymous from the person that sent us the testing, there's still an email address attached to it. So I think we're going to have a permission box anyway for being able to share that data. I think we may have to go down some sort of road with that anyway, where we have to ask permission. So if somebody doesn't want their results sharing, they will tick a box and it won't go into that collective section of the website.
Yeah, I think you'll be all right from a data protection or GDPR standpoint. I think as long as you don't share the email address and just the results, I think you should be fine because it's ultimately anonymous then, isn't it?
Yeah, but the thing is, I want to be ultra careful with it because, like I said to you, early on, any mistakes are going to ricochet quite massively because of what it is. And there's too many thousands of pounds tied up in that kit for it to
go wrong,
blow up very quickly. Yeah.
What's hilarious is we all use different labs, so we're gonna have lab wars.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's you've just got to be sensible about it as well and understand that it's an unregulated market, it's an untested market, and as a result, like I say, mistakes do happen. It's far from not possible. It does happen quite a bit.
I think the other side of it is
always for monetary gain.
And the other side of it is when people replicate legitimate brands, which we've seen time and time again, where people use a ROM sticker, slap on a bottle of olive oil, and then flog that on the market.
Yeah, but just because it's got a fake sticker on it, don't mean the compound's fake, does it?
No.
I mean, some people do make the genuine copies where they're just trying to trade off the brand reputation, but still producing a good quality product. There's definitely that. But I remember years ago. Do you remember Prochem shutting down while they tried to weed out who was copying them?
Yeah.
Yeah, a big stink over that.
Yeah.
Anyway, can we now talk about Herbalife, please? Because
Yes.
That's Dave's specialty. That is Herbalife, isn't it, Chads?
eating pies is my specialty this week.
You've got a layout for us from now, don't you? I'm going to try and timestamp this as we go as well. I'm going to try and be efficient.
Right, Dave, I wasn't going to ask you this because obviously, in my opinion, everyone who watches our podcast is pretty fucking hardcore, right? They should know who the fuck you are. But could you tell us a little about, Dave, how you come on to the scene?
Nathan Styles message, and he said only drug questions. That's all he wants to hear
No,
about.
Dave don't like big questions. You don't like them.
Nathan could just fucking text me at the end of the day. I don't know why the fuck he's saying that. So if you want a sort of background of me, right? Okay, very, very quickly. Started training when I was 16. Fat kid, weak, slow. Played rugby, wasn't very good. Got into the weights in the basement at home. Very strangely, that even when I first picked weights up with no instruction whatsoever, I trained with very strict form. I don't know why, I just did. Got into training, trained as a natural up until I was about 19. I made the big mistake, and this has carried on for a large part of my training, that weight was muscle. So I was 19, 23 stone, natural, obviously very fat, but still quite strong. I mean, I was squatting 4.5, 5 plates. I was leg pressing 1,000 pound. Not silly numbers, but for a 1990 fat kid, they weren't bad at all.
Stronger than
I was very, very lucky in that I grew up, or I cut my teeth in a gym where there was Billy Payne was training there. There were a couple of world champion powerlifters training there. Kev Taylor trained in there. Mary Ann Gay trained in there. So she was pro. Kev was 3 times British champion. Billy was going to be unfortunately, Billy never realized his potential, but he was still a fantastic bodybuilder. I trained with Mike Quinn in there. I remember Ian Harrison going there. So I got exposed to a lot of very high-quality bodybuilders very, very early on and got indoctrinated into a very hard training mindset. I didn't know any different. So I'm not trying to say, I'm super hardcore. It wasn't that. It was just what I was taught, so that's all I knew. You know, I didn't know that was particularly special. I mean, I trained in a gym where if you didn't bench 4 plates, you couldn't bench. And if you didn't squat over 5 plates, you couldn't squat. And I remember them taking the piss out of me because I could only behind the neck press 1 plate aside. That's why I did 5 later on, because it stuck with me for all those years. But that's the sort of gym I grew up in. And then I decided to diet for a comp. I got down to 14 stone 3. Started dieting the day after Bank Holiday Easter Monday because I wanted my Easter eggs. And then I stepped on stage October the 14th at 14 stone 3 as a natural.
So you stepped on stage?
Yeah, as a natural.
I never knew that. Have you got any pictures?
No, I've a fuck. Completely burnt out. It was a very hard prep. I mean, I'd dropped 9 stone, you know what I mean? So it wasn't an easy prep at all. There, I drifted away for probably only a couple of months, and I was at uni down at Colchester. I came back for the summer, and I started my first cycle. And I went back after the summer break, and I was 19 stone with abs showing. Not full abs, but outlay, but, just that you could just see where they needed to be. And I just kept growing. By 24, I was 24 stone. I was strong. I was big. I could move. And I always remember Billy opened a gym in Halifax. Now, Billy was one of Dorian's training partners. Yeah. Billy was my training partner when I was 16, but he was one of Dorian's training partners. And he got Dorian up to the gym to do the opening. And I remember so Kev Taylor rang me up and said, look, we're going over to Billy's gym. It's opening. I'm going to introduce you to Dorian. So, I mean, at this point, I'm obsessed with being a pro bodybuilder. It's just everything I'm thinking and dreaming of. So it was like, wow, yeah, great. And I remember turning up and I saw him face on across the gym. And I genuinely, and this sounds awful saying it now, but I genuinely thought, oh, he's not that big. And then he turned to the side And this fucker was as wide from front to back as he was from side to side. The thickness on him was just like, and I just stood there like, what the fuck is that's inhuman. Anyway, Kev went and had a chat with him. Dorian looked at me. That was the end of it. I didn't think anything of it. Job done. Left the gym, and in the car on the way back, Kev said to me, Dorian said, because I was dieting for the Leeds qualifier, it was EFBB Leeds qualifier, and I was dieting for that. And basically, Kev said to me, Dorian says, if you can get in shape for Leeds and you look half decent, I have to take you down to see him, and he'll turn you pro. My head just exploded. Now, I'd had a niggle in my left pec for weeks, but once I warmed up, it had gone. So I've gone into the gym the next day. I'm fired up to all heaven. Pec's tight, it's hurting. I warm it up, it eases off. So I'm flying on the incline. I've got 120-pound dumbbells in my hands. I'm about 7th or 8th rep, and I've gone super, super wide with them like this. And this left pec just carried on going down to the floor. I tore it clean out. It pulled off the rib cage here, and the 2 attachments came out there. So it was nigh on floating. I was black from here to my wrist to my waist. Went down to the hospital. They sent me home initially, took me back the next day, had an ultrasound, and the guy said, yeah, it's detached. I'm recommending it be reattached. Saw the consultant surgeon about a week later, and they refused to do it. And
What's
that was
it
pretty
so
much
bad?
it to me. No, just because I admitted to using steroids.
Fuckers.
What a load of fucking bullshit.
And I must admit, I started my first cycle at 19, and by the time I'm at this point at 24 and a half, I'm still on my first cycle, just so you know.
Proper cycle.
I'd been about a gram a week for over 4 years.
How many of you are accepting things saturated and just stop working, apparently? It's amazing, that, isn't it?
Yeah, they down-regulate, they didn't work.
Yeah. So,
I don't know how I wrote Willie for that many years. Should have hired fucking Dave. Would have been big by now.
It'd be £540.
I know.
I mean, I had a 24-inch calf, 72-inch chest.
What
So
were the arms at the peak?
At the
Fucking
biggest
huge
amounts
arms.
of 26 and a half. 26 and a half.
Is that the newspaper article that said something dad, biggest arms or something?
And they were 25 and a half when they did that. They got bigger after that.
Yeah.
Didn't train for 14 years. At this point, I'm 27 stone of fat. I've got no natural test production. Didn't know about shutdown. Didn't know about recovery. Didn't understand why I was just fat and tired and had no desire for life anymore. And I got sent to prison. Did 4.5 years. But I did 4.5 years of training, naturally. I came out at 19 stone. And then went on a cycle, did about a gram, then did another cycle about a gram, and then did a third cycle about 1.2. And then I met Alvin Small. I was roughly about 370 pounds at this point, but I was looking to get into strongman. And Alvin's like, and I mean, I was repping 5 plates for sets of 20 on squat. I was shoulder pressing 80 kilo dumbbells for sets. So I had some strength. What I couldn't do was pick things up off the floor. And I never have been able to. My deadlift is garbage. Met Alvin Small, and he started saying, look, you want to compete, Dave? You want to compete? And I'm like, I can't. I've made loads of excuses. He actually said to me, you can, you just don't want to. And I was like, no, you're right, actually. There is no excuse. I can do this. I said, well, you'll have to help me because I really don't know where I am these days with it all. So I started dieting, and I was on a 7-point caliper. I was 11%, 10.5%, 11%, and I was 306 pounds. And there is a picture of me at Body Power doing a double bicep with the sleeves cut off my t-shirt. That's then. I was sponsored by SSN. Yeah. Now, to be fair, Alvin was doing it as a favor, so I wasn't getting the attention a client would have done, and I sort of got lost a little bit in the background. But I just got fed up. I was fed up with dieting, so I thought, fuck it, let's see how big we can get. So 2 cycles later, I'm 415 pounds.
And the most important question, what were those cycles? I'll have to get my notepad out.
Right. So the first one, I started off at about 2 grams. Then I went up to 3.5 grams just test. Then I threw Deca in. I was 4.5 gram. 3 gram test, 1.5 gram of Deca. That was
Bad
it.
boy.
Me and Hilly have often flirted with your high test protocols ourselves when we talk about them. How did you manage those? Like physiologically, like how were your estrogen control, all that sort of stuff?
I didn't do any estrogen control.
You just
Not seen
do
his
you not
videos.
aromatize on that dosage?
He didn't do
Oh
anything
yeah,
at
but
all.
I'm just super tolerant to estrogen.
You know,
That's
it's
why
funny,
I always held
always-
water.
Yeah.
We get asked quite a lot on the podcast, like, what does it take to be 250, 300 pound? And we always kind of just say, look, if you can't get to 300 pound, or if you can get to 300 pound, you wouldn't be asking, because it just happens. Like what obviously Dave's saying now, it's not just anyone can do that. You've either got it or you don't.
Well, people think, oh, it's drugs. It's food. I was consuming 10,000 calories a day, and they were 10,000 calories that were clean.
Every day.
Potato and beef.
Rice and chicken. He remembers my food tubs.
I've been at his house and he's just got pans all over, cooking chicken breasts and potatoes. We'd be sat at Body Power and he'd just be picking one after the other. I'm like, Dave, what's on that, mate? What are you doing? But it was just, honestly, like, I used to drive. Where was your gym at the time when we met?
Oh, Carlisle, yeah.
So, like, every 2 or 3 weeks, I used to drive all the way to Carlisle on a Saturday morning, run through posing with Dave, and then he would ruin my life training. And then we became friends from then, and we have been ever since. But it was like, it doesn't matter where we were, it was just, it wasn't like meals, it was just continuously eating the most plain, boring food. And you would go in his house and there'd just be every pan in his house, every pan would be cooking food all the time.
You can still see that on YouTube. If you go on Dave's channel and you scroll back far enough, you can watch all the site injection. That's why I was like, at the time, I was like, how do I fucking pin my whatever? And I'd like go and watch like all the tutorials and shit. But you can find all the food stuff, all the training stuff. You can still watch it. You know, it's still on there.
The thing was, so I would set up 2 slow cookers, 3 kilos of chicken, 3 kilos of beef. I'd do a kilo of dry rice in a rice cooker. I didn't eat veg because there just wasn't any room for it. And what was the diet healthy? No. Was it fuck? Was it functional? Yes, because I wanted carbs and I wanted proteins. Everything else had to go by the wayside because I just couldn't eat any more. Did I force feed? Probably for about half the day. And my wife talks about it. She's like, I used to take a spoonful, retch, water, get it down. Take a spoonful, retch, get it down. And I would force feed. And if I hadn't finished my food, I'd get up in the middle of the night and I'd finish it off. That food had to be finished by the end of the day. But living at over 300, and I'll just say at over 350 pounds at 6'1" hurts. You don't fit in anything. You can't stand for too long. You can't use public transport. You can't use a plane. You can't use a train. You don't fit in a car. And it's the simple reason is there's a window here. So I drove around like that everywhere I went. And then I'd end up with backache and back pains because I was always leaning to one side. It's just clothes don't fit. Jeans had to be made. T-shirts had to be made. Everything just becomes difficult. The strangest thing was how people react. So you actually get to you start off, and I'm not the prettiest looking. I know that I've got a bald head and everything else. And so there's a start point where people tend to avoid you. Then there's a point where you become almost ridiculed. So you'll get abused just walking down the street. Oi, right, Ed, and all this sort of stuff. And then as you get bigger, it actually goes away and you then start to become public property. And people just walk up to you and take pictures outside of you. It's the weirdest shit. And then I remember when I was at my biggest, I was walking around York and it really confused me because Darren Sadler had just walked past me from World's Strongest Man. No one had batted an eyelid, but I had a queue of people wanting to come and take a photo with me or wanted their kids to come and get a photo with me. because I was just so damn big. And it was really weird. I mean, I remember going to Cattlemen's Association in Harrogate after the British finals that were there one year. And I ate the 96-ounce steak challenge. And people were just stood around watching me eat. Not because, I mean, there's loads of people done that challenge, but it was because the size I was doing that challenge.
Did you always have the capacity to eat a lot of food, Dave? Even when you were younger?
To an extent, yeah, but it only took me so far.
Yeah.
I mean,
Do you think if you could go back, you'd change the way that you ate?
No, so I get this question asked a lot. I mean, I sit here now with you today. I've got heart failure. I've got severe AFib. I've got stage 4 renal failure. I've got 2 destroyed discs in my back. I've got 2 damaged vertebrae in my neck. I've got arthritis in my left wrist. I've got severe arthritis in my ankles, my feet, and my toes, and joint damage in all 3 of those departments. My knees and elbows are surprisingly good, and my shoulders are surprisingly good. And people say, well, would you take it all back and do it different? No, because that all led to me being here now.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see how far I could go. And the only way that was going to end was with me breaking at some point. And, you know, I used to do 1,050. You've been to Maloney's, haven't you? At Huddersfield. Yes. That calf machine in the corner, that 15,000 pound stack. Yeah, I used to stack that thing, which is why I've got fucked joints in my ankles and my toes.
How old are you now, Dave?
53.
Because I was going to say, my dad's like 66, 67 now, and ever since he's been just over 60, he needs hips, knees, heart. He's got this here, this wrong here, and he hasn't done anything that you've done. He played rugby and something else. So I think that you can get to a certain age and have all these problems done, no matter what you've done. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I have no regrets. I wouldn't change a thing. And to be honest, I think because I pushed to the extreme, yes, I broke, but I think it actually saved my life. And that might sound very moronic, but if I'd have stayed 360 pound, I could move, I was strong, I could train hard. I was quite quick, only short distances, but I still could move quite well for my weight. I would have ended up having an identity around that. And that would have made it very difficult to walk away from.
Yeah.
Because I went on and broke, I never got that identity. Because I was always pushing for my limit, not to fit an image that anybody else wanted to see. But at 360 with veins, and I mean, the other shot that I always use is the black vest shot where I've got all the veins showing in my tricep. Yeah. That's at 365. Now, if I'd held that, and at that point, I'm squatting 8 plates, I'm benching 5 for reps, I'm shoulder pressing 5 for reps, I was strong, legit strong, 500-pound pull downs. If I'd have maintained that, that was marketable, that was sellable, that could have really boomed when the IG stuff boomed off and everything started going that way. But because I went beyond that and ended up not appealing the way I looked, you know, I got too big, I got too smooth, I got too fat, then I never got into that trap where the way I looked was that much of an identity for me. So when it all stopped, and it stopped pretty abruptly, there was still some adjustment, but it wasn't anywhere near as hard as it could have been. And I work with people every week that have serious health conditions, not necessarily because of their steroid use, but are definitely not helped by their steroid use. And they can't walk away. Because now all they identify as their whole quality of life is in the way they look. Nothing else. And there was a bit of deliberate as well. There was actually a bigger plan there. So the plan was get notoriety for what I did, convert that notoriety into known for being knowledgeable, and then have a career off the back of that. Because whether we like it or not, if you're 360 pound with a 25, 26-inch arm, people think you know about steroids whether you do or not.
Hey, can you remember, what was it? Weren't you ill once and they told you they might have to send you to Edinburgh Zoo for an MRI or something where they're the elephants? Swear to God, I remember being telling me, he was like, they said I might have to go to Edinburgh Zoo to get an MRI because I won't fit with the silverbacks.
Yeah, I wouldn't fit in the machine, and the only machine they had that was big enough was the MRI that used Edinburgh Zoo to MRI the silverbacks.
That's a claim of itself, that.
This all started because when I was smaller, before I was at the size I was at that time, they'd put me in an MRI machine and I'd got stuck.
That was it.
And the bed had come out and I'd stayed in. So what had happened is I'd gone in and I've gone in with my shoulders up like this. And then they said, right, lay and relax. So I've relaxed, my shoulders have dropped and I've wedged. And so I was pissing myself laughing. The nurses were panicking like fuck. So they sent the bed back in. The bed's come back out again without me on it. And they're getting hold of my ankles. They're trying to pull me out of the machine with the bed. And I'm just stuck fast, fucking finding it hilarious. So after that, it went on my records that if I needed another MRI, I have to go to Edinburgh Zoo. And I got bigger after that as well.
Fucking mental, isn't it?
I mean, my kidney failure, the renal specialist at the time said it wasn't drug related. I actually outgrew the ability for my kidneys to work.
Which makes sense in it.
Was that what drove it to a complete halt, Dave? Was the renal failure? Was that the first sign of, I need to stop now? Yeah.
Well, I'd been getting regular blood tests, and my EGFR was 40/42. I'd spoke to the doctor about it numerous occasions, and he kept saying to me, no, that's normal for you. And obviously there isn't, data on a fucking I was about 380 pound at the time. There isn't data on a 380 pound man. There's where should his kidney function be?
Yeah.
But I was seeing water retention, and I was, I suppose we all do this. The simple solution was my kidneys aren't working, but I'd came up with some convoluted, long, elaborate reason that I wasn't driving water into the cell, and this wasn't doing this because of this, and this wasn't doing this because of that, and basically my kidneys.
Putting more lactose to drive to the muscles.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I started drinking salt water in the morning. Which did actually help to a small extent, but I mean the water shifts at that sort of size it's quite incredible how much you can change by moving your water around, because you're moving 20-30 pound of water about, you're not moving 5, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I remember when I went into hospital and my EGFR was 20, and they put me on like a side waiting ward, and I said, look, because my fingers were swelling up at this point, everything was swelling up at this point. And I said, look, it's getting worse. And she says, look, we don't need to worry unless your genitals swell up. And about an hour later, I wandered in looking like I'd been riding a horse for 4 days and just went, that thing that you said we didn't need to worry until it happened? Well, I tell you what, I wish it had stayed like that. It was
fucking right.
Huge. And that was me straight after Leeds and 5 days in Leeds on IV. And I went in, I was about 4:15 the time I'd weighed myself. I think it was about 4:25 when I went into hospital. And I came out at 355.
What? That is such a ridiculous weight. It's 6'1" for 25.
It's just water, though. I came out because I had recognised I looked like a fat mess, and I'd been dieting and trying to tidy up, and it wasn't happening. Obviously, when I went into hospital, diuretics, I dropped all this fucking water. And I came out and it was like, fucking hell, I'm lean.
Yeah. I'll keep going. New cycle.
But that was the strange thing was as well, just before my kidneys failed, I'd already made the decision that I wasn't doing it anymore. I stopped.
So
Dave,
what
go on.
No, you give me.
What I was going to ask was, we were talking about drugs and food and that. What was your training like when you were at these big weights?
Hard.
What style of training was you doing?
Heavy as fuck.
Yes, but not necessarily. So I'm quite old school. 6 to 8 reps. Build up. Probably first set will be 8, 10, 12 reps. Second set will be 8 to 10. And then it's six sets of 6 up to the heaviest weight. Fail. And then drop the weight, probably not as a drop set. Second set, probably about 40% drop, and then rep out a lot of maybe somewhere around the 12 mark. So it's 2 failures to an exercise. Chest would have 3 exercises. Biceps would have 1.5 because the second exercise would only be 4 or 5 sets. Triceps would have 1 3/4. Quads would be 3 exercises. Hamstrings would be 2. Calves would be 1. But what people don't grasp is the focus and the rep quality that I was always striving to achieve.
Yeah.
And my failure point, I mean, I've known myself take literally 15 seconds to grind out a rep because I walked back out of it. And I had a simple mantra. If it was still moving, I stayed in the movement. And if I completed that rep, I went for another. No matter how long it took me to get, I still went for another. And that was the edge of those failure sets. But I did, for a long time, I did a hybrid time under tension, heavy rotation. So I'd do, for argument's sake, now I always done a 3-body split. So I do chest, tries, and hamstrings, time under tension. Then I do back, shoulders, calves, heavy. Then I do abs, buys, and quads, time under tension, day off. And then I come back to chest, but this time it's heavy. Back, shoulders, and calves is now time under tension. And I did that for quite a while. I got really strong doing that. But it also, and I use it a lot now because doing ultra slow reps helps you meticulise your form and engagement. And it's not the form in the sense of you have to have this form to do this exercise. It's a form in the sense that you're feeling every inch of that movement where you want to feel it. And I spent a lot of time playing with exercises to maximize that I got the recruitment I wanted out of that exercise.
Yeah.
And then once that was nailed, then I'd push hard and heavy. And you'd just get to a point, even niggles would start to appear, or you just know I'm not feeling this like I was. Everything's getting a little bit loose. And then I'd go back to the TUT work, tighten everything up again, and then push on again. And I mean, I was bent over around 6 plates at my strongest. They weren't clean, but I could do 5 straight.
Like your pressing strength is insane. Thinking about, having a pec tear, like, because Ilya and me, like, we've both got pec tears as well. And it's like, strength is like literally, pressing strength is like nowhere near what it was prior to.
What was your overhead pressing, Dave, again?
5 plates behind the neck for 5 reps. I'd done 4.5 plates for a double free bar, but the injury risk was just so high at that sort of weight that I just stuck to Smith. Because at the end of the day, I wasn't interested in really what the weight I was using. I was interested in what the stress that did to my body. But I do remember the first time I hoiked 5 plates overhead and felt my spine just go. And I was like, "Ooh, fuck! This is going to hurt if it goes wrong."
In the session, when Dave would make you focus on your form, it was horrendous. It did make it worse though when you've got like a 400-pound bloke stinking of fish, like screaming in your ear. A lot of Dave's training for me comes because it's Dave doing it with you, because his aggression and his focus. Like, I would be squatting and there was a 400-pound huge bloke behind you, like, you're not fucking putting the weight down whether you like it or not. So you weren't. Yeah. But the attention, as Dave says, the attention to form and using the muscle was intense all of the time. It was horrendous. I used to have to spend 6 hours up there before I could drive home. It was awful. Horrendous it was.
I'm actually doing some workshops this year because I do enjoy that side of it, and I don't do it anywhere near as much as I'd like to. So I'm going to put a couple of workshops on this year, and there'll be full day seminars going through training technique and stuff like that. But there's all sorts of little tips and tweaks you can do. But it's for me, training is priority. All 3, training, drugs, and diet are all important. There's no denying that. We know you can grow without drugs because there are natural athletes that do grow without drugs. Yes, it won't be to the same extent, but we know it can happen. We know you can grow with a less than optimal diet because pretty much every 80s fucking bodybuilder did that. They used to live off ice cream as long as they got enough protein, the carbs came from anything.
Yep.
But we know with optimized diet, recovery and growth would be so much better. But the one factor that remains resolute, in my opinion, throughout it all, is the ability to stimulate change. That's what you're going to train for. You're trying to stimulate change. It doesn't matter the mechanism you use to do that, as long as that mechanism works for you. But I like I say, I got this baptism of fire at a very young age when it came to training intensity, and it's never left me. And the only thing I miss now, I don't miss being big. I don't even miss being strong. I miss being able to train hard. That's the only thing I miss. And that's why I struggle to train now, because it just feels like I'm fucking about.
Yeah, I get that.
because I just miss. I just miss absolutely. And I was strong in weird things. So I used to do a lot of single arm isolation preacher curls with a dumbbell. So I took right up, full extension, fully straight, up all the way back down on a preacher bench. And I was using 100-pound dumbbells to do that.
What's that in kilos?
About 50 kilos, 45?
40.
Like
Yeah,
45
40,
kilos.
42.
Fucking hell.
Which is
I used to do side lateral raises with 105s. I could do 70-pounders sat in a bench, not moving anything, just going like that. That would be a 70-pound dumbbell. So that's what, 32 kilo dumbbell? I was strong in weird movements, but I couldn't pull. My best deadlift is 6 plates.
What was your back like, Dave?
Big, wide, strong. I just
So
couldn't
do you
deadlift.
think you need... So that basically means you don't need a deadlift to have a good back?
The deadlift to me is more used. The problem with the deadlift, I do use a version of it, but the problem with the deadlift I find is, where do you put it? Because if you actually look at the levers and mechanisms, it's not overly back focused.
Of course not, no.
It's more glute and posterior chain and core. So I see it as a functional exercise that helps maintain the functionality. And I think this is one thing as bodybuilders we lose sight of because we use machines for everything now. That we actually lose the ability to actually stitch the muscle we have together in a functional form because we don't move in that way anymore. So I like keeping benching in, I like keeping squatting, and I used to still deadlift or at least rack pull. But it's a shit exercise for me, and I've never got on well with it. Now, rowing, could row till the cows come home. Used to love rowing.
But I mean, it's either or. Like, either they row or they deadlift. You know, it's kind of like they don't often do both.
I mean, even at my biggest and my strongest, even when I was getting up to 6 plates, I wasn't wearing a belt when I rowed. I haven't trained in a belt for a very long time.
What was the reason for that?
Didn't like them. No, nothing. I just didn't like them. I found them uncomfortable. I found they got in the way. I used to love
pulling without.
I used to love squatting. Yeah, and I used to be strong on weird things like leg extension.
Yeah,
pec deck. You know, it was like just unconventional, but at the same time, I don't believe in this. Oh well, you like straight arm pec deck. It's like, oh yeah, you can't go heavy on that because it's like, fuck, of course you can. All that muscle knows is pull. It doesn't know anything else. It just knows to pull. So it doesn't matter what it's doing. As long as it's fucking pulling, I'll put as much load on the end of it as I can, as long as I can do it in good and safe form.
I have this conversation with my clients once a week. Your muscle can't count. All it knows is one thing, just a pull or push.
But yeah, I do think training is the most underdeveloped thing within bodybuilding.
It's regressing. That's the problem. It's regressing in this day and age.
Well, when's the last time you saw someone go, right, how did you train? What drug cycle are you on? Or what your diet is? How many times do they ask you how you train? But the other thing is, and this may come across as a criticism, and it is genuinely not. It's just an observation. If steroids disappeared tomorrow, I would reckon about 70% of the bodybuilders that currently exist would disappear with it.
Yep.
Because they wouldn't have progress. Agreed. Because they do not have the aptitude to train at the level that's required to make the progress that they want. And so they'd soon get frustrated and bored and drop by the wayside. I can't sing. I'm shit at it. I'm not a very good cook. And it's the same sort of... So I don't have the mental capacity or makeup or skills to do those things. And some people just don't have the mental capacity to train at a certain level. And some people do. Jordan's a prime example of someone who can go to the nth degree with his training. Whether you agree with how he trains or not, doesn't matter. That you can't get away from the fact that he has the mental genetics to endure the extremes that his training creates.
Yep.
And you know, it's. I think most people just don't realize how hard you can actually train and still grow. I mean, people say to me, oh, I'm still sore, so I'm not training that body part today. Fuck me, I mean, every session I went into, I was still sore from the session before. And because I split my legs, I would go to do leg curls, and my quads would be absolutely fucking killing me. So I couldn't lay down on the bench to do leg curls. I was fucking agony doing that. But something else, and it was just like, oh, for fuck's sake, this is torturous. But you spent every day in pain. But then you knew you'd done a job well done.
Then nowadays,
I know Dom.
I think a lot of it just is like when you first started on about how you started. You started because you saw people in the gym train hard, and that's how it was then or ever. Whereas now, people start because they either see competition pictures on Instagram or because they see people doing shit on YouTube. There isn't many people seeing people in real life training the fucking ass off. So
I think the other thing was as well, the northern training scene was very insular. You couldn't get away with training like shit in the gym because you'd get the piss ripped out of you for it. And like I said, my shoulder power came from having the piss taken out of me because I couldn't shoulder press. That stuck with me, silly as it sounds, that stuck with me for so long. And it was like, no one's ever going to take the piss out of my shoulder power again. Ever. Yeah, and I made sure of it. But the other thing is I used to look, so when I was coming up in training, when it was leg day, I would used to hope that the powerlifters were in. Because I'd go train with them. Now, they'd be doing 2 reps. I'd be doing sets of 8 or 10. But I'd try and stick with them for weight. Because I didn't, and I never differentiate that, well, that person's on gear at this point and I'm not. It didn't enter my brain. I wanted to be with them or beat them. It was, and I used to, Hilly knows I'm noisy when I train. Very noisy when I train. I've been barred from a lot of gyms because of it. And it was never a look at me thing, but it was how I focused myself. And though it sounds almost embarrassing to say it now, but I used to try and take myself to an almost cartoon environment, sort of animalistic sort of environment in my head, where I was this machine or this creature, and I was literally, this was this challenge between me and that piece of, not even the piece of equipment, just the challenge between me and creating stress. The one thing that really pissed me off when I trained was someone touching the bar before I was ready for it. The amount of time I've headbutted people, I've screamed at people because they've come in too early. Because I like to struggle, but I also learned to hold form when I struggle, and that came from the TUT work.
It's funny. Jordan's the same. I've seen Jordan freak out at people if someone's touched the bar before he's fucking ready for them to touch it for the same reasons.
It's the famous shoulder press dumbbell video when he fails himself and he just goes fucking mental in the negative, screaming at himself.
Yeah, and I was a bit the same way. I mean, I had a training partner for a very long time called Dom. Dom knew all my dark secrets, and Dom would tell me those secrets. So it'd be like, in his younger days, if I'd got dumped by a girlfriend or whatever, he'd be like, yeah, she's left you because you're a fat, useless cunt, mate. She's left you because you train like a fanny. Yeah, she'd be shagging someone else who's stronger than you now, trains harder than you now. And it was all this sort of stuff. Now, Dom's half-caste, and he split with his missus, and his missus got a new fella who was white. So I was like, yeah, your kid's got a new daddy now, a white daddy. Not interested in you. That was the level we went to at each other. But it brought out the aggression. I think I've upset Riz. He's gone.
It's the racial comments. That's what it is. It's because he's brown.
But that was because we knew each other's deepest insecurities. We used them against each other, because I'm not being funny, but when you're under 6-7 plates on a squat and you're going to true failure, and most people don't squat to failure, they squat to where they think they can't get another one. They squat to mental failure, but they don't squat to physical failure. You're not going to enter that rep lightly unless there's something really pushing you to do it. That's the level we were at each other at. And there's many a time we'd finish a set and have to walk down the gym and walk back to calm down because we were going to lamp each other.
Yeah.
But it brought out the biggest intensity we could. Some people train more mentally focused and quiet. I've always been loud and aggressive. But that loud and aggression is my way of overcoming the fear of what I'm about to, deal with.
I think if you did that now, someone will record it, put it on TikTok, and be like, "Oh, look at this guy," and then a bunch of people will make videos about it. You just can't get away with that now.
No, and I mean, as I got older, I learned to be a little bit more internalized with it. But the thing was, so you'd have this noise and you'd have this aggression, but you'd have this very controlled rep. So there was no throwing weight around. It was still very, everything was still very measured. I mean, my standard rep pace is probably about 1.5 to 2 seconds up, 1.5, 2 seconds down. I'm quite slow. I don't explode. I never have done. It's always been a very controlled rep. But yeah, to get through that fear factor of how much that set's gonna hurt. And I'm not being funny, but if you're not struggling to sleep the night before you do legs, you're not training legs hard enough. Because I used to be fucking shitting myself. Because I knew how much pain it was going to come the next day. I mean, I remember unracking...
Sorry, go on, Dave.
I remember unracking 800 kilo on a leg press and literally feeling my thigh bones sink into my hips. And, at that second, when you feel your bones go clunk down, and you're like, shit, if this goes wrong, I'm going to be in a real mess.
In a wheelchair.
How I'm not is I do sometimes do it. Now, yeah, that was me. I took it to extremes. You don't need to go there, but you still need to be pushing the intensity. You can keep the weights lighter and do slightly more reps. But I used to get bored when I started going above 8 reps. Because my sets were very thoughtful, very thinky, very focused. It's mentally exhausting to maintain that for extended rep periods.
With your pec tech, how did you get past that mental block of then just pushing past it?
Well, I had 14 plus years off. So when I started again, I started from a very natural, untrained state. So in a way that helped because I was starting with no weight.
Right.
So as I built strength up, I built strength up around what the injury was capable of coping with. I think it's a lot harder when you go from being already at a level of strength and that strength's still there to some degree, but you've got this injury that you're trying to work around. No, I was lucky in the sense that I was starting from effectively an untrained state. So it wasn't too bad. But I mean, the lifts and muscle tears I've got is ridiculous.
Yeah, but...
Did you?
Yes. Both biceps. Both biceps are torn.
Oh, really?
No, I've only used it once.
What's that?
Great for me.
GH.
How much did you use, Dave?
27 IU a day.
Really?
Yeah. Farmer Gino.
Right.
I pulsed it.
What was that for?
Oh, it was only for a few months. So basically, when we released the Under Construction first film, the money that I made out of the first film paid for the growth for the second film.
All of it.
What? So you're doing it in bonus dosages?
So what I'd do is I'd do 4 to 5 IUs several times throughout the day. I used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and do a G8 shot.
All right, okay.
Were you running into them with that, Dave?
I did. I went with Milos for a while. Very similar time to actually when JP was with him.
Right.
And I think we were at about 120 IU a day at the peak.
Off rapid?
Yeah.
Get out.
Milos's protocols are extreme. Now, the thing was, I'd got to the point where I could take 50 IU a rapid post-workout, be late eating, and, all right, I'd get a few tingly metallic taste in my mouth and numb lips, but that'd be the end of it.
Did you change your training?
No. Milos tried to change my training, and I told him no chance.
As I say with JP.
Yeah.
Do you remember JW?
Yes.
Do you remember me going to see him and crashing the car?
Don't think so.
So I went down to see a guy off the boards called JW. It was before there was the expo in London where they had the British Grand Prix years ago. And I was driving down the motorway to go, and he lived quite south, didn't he? I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was quite south. And I was doing, I think I was doing 20 IU or 30 IU of Lantus. And I was doing about 10 IU with every meal at this point. I was playing around with stuff and just seeing. And I passed out on the motorway and stuck the car into a tree at about 90 mile an hour.
I heard this story on the Drugs and Stuff podcast, I swear, with Scott McNally. Yeah.
I passed out because of the insulin. And the tree hit the banking, went on its nose. It was an estate, Mondeo estate, and the tree crushed the passenger side front to back. It pirouetted back down into the motorway. I don't know how I left the car. I just remember being aware of being stood in the middle of the motorway, and someone was trying to grab hold of me, and I was like, no, I need to find me food. And I was looking up and down the motorway for me right. It's gone everywhere. And the car was fucked. Wheels were missing. Every panel on it was battered. And that was slim. I passed out slim.
You know, when you were saying there that you could take a big dose and you wouldn't really hypo it, do you think that is the becoming resistant to the insulin, or do you think that's to do with the high GH dose?
I think it's a bit of everything. I think the insulin resistance was wrecked at that point. And I mean, that was, so I worked with Milos on the second UC project. So when I pushed from 365 up to 4 odd, and I think the GH and the insulin, I don't think they were the things that pushed the health over the edge, but I think they were the things that pushed everything else over the edge. Yeah. And when it was all done and dusted, I didn't actually gain a huge amount of muscle in that cycle. When the water dropped and everything came out of me, I actually wasn't that much bigger.
Dave, after all them years of eating so much food and doing all these protocols, what's your thyroid health like now?
Fine.
It's not been damaged from all that food and all that GH and whatnot? No. Okay.
You've got to remember, though I used a lot of GH, I only used it for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Relatively. You know what I mean? I was on GH for no more than 3 months. That's it. Same with the insulin. I wasn't on the insulin for that long a time.
Was that the only time you used the insulin? Or did you use it before?
I experimented a bit, which is when I had the crash.
Yeah.
And I was experimenting when I had the crash, and obviously that stopped me from using it, because I was like, fuck that shit. So, and then I went back to it with Milos, but I never... So Milos wanted you to do massive pre-workout insulin with a huge amount of intra-nutrition, and I never got on with that. I used to not be able to train, because I used to feel bloated and feel sick, and unflavoured citrulline is just about the worst substance on the planet. God, that stuff is fucking rank. But yeah, and it was like, it just didn't really work for me. It was, and I'm not saying it was a chemical thing that didn't work, just the adherence of it was difficult for me, because I just felt bloated and uncomfortable with so much intra. I've never been good with intra. I don't like pre-workouts, so I've never been able to use stuff like that. Now, 100 mg of oxys and 100 mg of Anavar pre-workout, fuck me, those pumps were crippling. I couldn't even move my bloody arm.
What questions do you boys want to ask? You and Declan.
I actually got some impressive questions. Normally they're like, would you shag a midget? Would Riz beat a child up in a fight? We've actually got some good questions just because Dave's here. I filtered some of them out, so we've got some half-decent ones. Obviously, we've answered some of these, but I think...
Hang on, I want to know if you'd shag a midget now.
I've already done it twice, Dave. I'm good.
I wish she's got decent-sized titties.
Exactly. It's even better peak off-season as well. It's like throwing a little paperweight around.
My mate always thinks like
I'm
videos
married
of
to a
midgets.
midget,
I'm like,
so it's fine.
I can see it.
They're up on their game. They're getting more attractive these days. I'm telling you, they know what they're doing.
Yeah. I've got a really simple question here, Dave. It's, if you remember something from the past. Someone said, you should ask Hilly if he remembers the time Dave said on the forums he wanted to crush James Watt's skull, as he said he could never get in shape.
I remember that.
Yeah.
So he didn't actually say I couldn't get in shape. I was dieting, and it was that dieting when I dieted down to 306. But every time I made any comment, put any post up, he would just have a go. And I just had enough. And I said I wanted to batter him. And I said I wanted to actually feel his bones break in my hands, because I wanted the pleasure of actually... He shut up after that, strangely. Yeah, the old forum battles.
The forums are fantastic, weren't they? Absolutely fantastic.
Should I fire off some questions?
Yeah. Go on.
Okay. If cost was an issue, when would GH be more beneficial? Off season or in prep?
So, I have very simple guidelines around GH. I don't hold it as a holy grail. I think Hilly disagrees with me on this, and I know Broderick disagrees with me on this quite strongly. To me, GH faster day and fat loss, GH PM recovery, and that's the sort of two windows where I like to see it work. The argument I have with GH PM recovery is, if you're doing GH PM for recovery, then why aren't you increasing the frequency of your training to maximize the fact that you're recovering quicker? So if you're still sticking to your same training format and then you add GH PM, you're not going to over-recover. Yeah. So either you're under-recovering in the first instance, which means that your training frequency is not sustainable, or your diet is not where it needs to be, or you're wasting your money because you're not taking advantage of the extra recovery that GH is giving you. And if I'm strapped for money, then I'd use it pre-comp.
So you're saying, Dave, if we were to escalate our growth hormone dosage, would you also increase training volume as well, or frequency? Either or?
Yeah, yes.
Cool. This is a good one, but I don't know if you can answer this, Dave. Out of all the blood works you've seen, what was the worst and what was the cause of it?
There was one guy, I won't name, I never do, but there was one guy, and he wasn't like a competitive bodybuilder or anything like that. It was just a guy that trained a little bit, and they were horrendous. I think his hemoglobin was about 213. His HDL was like 0.2. You know, everything you could think of being fucked was fucked. And he was just a guy that was hammering gear in it, and it was just ignorance. He just didn't have a clue.
Did he feel okay?
And he's the only... No, he felt like dog shit. That's why I came for a blood test. He's the only guy I've ever rung up and said, you have to stop what you're doing now. Now, the few times I have rung people, it's to inform them that, unfortunately, there is something they need to go see a doctor. So we had a guy with thyroid cancer, we had a guy with leukemia, and we've had a couple of others. And they're the only people I've ever rung. I don't ring people off bat with results, but this guy is the only person I've ever rung and said, you have to stop what you're doing. But
was he doing like Class A's as well or something on top?
No, not really. He liked to drink. Diet wasn't good, but it was just... And I wouldn't say... I mean, it wasn't like he was using 5 gram of gear or anything like that, but I mean, he was a recreational lifter. He was probably pissing around the 2.5 gram mark. But he'd been fucking about with a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of the other for just extended periods of time with no real understanding of anything he was doing. And I mean, I don't judge him for that because I spent the 4 years of my gear usage just, I'll take a bit of that this week, see how it happens. But at the end of the day, he was putting himself at some severe risk. So it was a case, look, you need to stop. You're a dangerous stroke here. And he did, and last time I saw him was last year, and his bloods came back really good, and he was fine and doing well.
Is that quite commonplace, Dave, with the bloods? Do you see a lot of people that have no fucking clue what they're doing in this day and age, or has it improved over time?
It's mixed. I see a lot of people not quite understand this, particularly around TRT. You see a lot of guys doing self-TRT, but it's like, I'm on TRT, I'm doing 400 mega tests a week. You know, and it's like... Yeah, but there's also a difference between someone who's self-administering TRT because they're just self-administering TRT and somebody who's a bodybuilder looking to compete. And I like to not stand in judgment of anybody because at the end of the day, with the shit that I've done to myself, I don't really feel I can. But at the same time, I'll also try and educate people so that they can make, better decisions. And I'll, advise them, look, that's not really TRT. You want to run higher, that's up to you. But you have to take responsibility that this area, and this area is going to need to be monitored because this is where shit's going to go wrong. HDL is the big one, and there's a lot of argument around whether it's significant or not. I don't think there's a definitive answer as such. Obviously, APOA and APOB are probably more important markers, but they're expensive to test for. But I think with the HDL argument, I would concentrate on the HDL ratio, make sure that's always where it needs to be. And my argument is, if I'm wrong and HDL is not that significant in long-term cardiovascular risk, and like I said, there is a lot of controversy around this medically as well, then I've not done any harm. But if I'm right, then the opposite of that is obviously a lot of problems. So I just bear on the side of caution with that one. But I mean, I know that statistically there's not really enough stats to say that low HDL is linked to greater cardiovascular risk in the case of actual heart attacks that have happened and such.
It's the LDL that they say. Well, the group arguing against the HDL, they say LDL is the one that you want to be tracking, isn't it?
They do, but most bodybuilders that are serious, they look after their LDL quite well because they run a reasonable diet. It's the fringe guys that are the casual users where you see the crappy LDL. But there's some LDLs, the super low density stuff and all that as well. So there's different things with it. Not all LDL's bad. There's some LDLs that are fine. So it is a much more complex picture, but I just like to, from my point of view, I take the fact that I'm talking about people's health to them quite seriously, and I have a strong sense of responsibility around that. So I would rather be cautious in advice, but I'm happy to explain why I'm being cautious in that advice and let them make their own decision on that.
Yeah. And how would
you say
kind of really popular now, or it's almost like a prophylactic drug is telmisartan. Do you think it's a little bit overused? Mm-hmm. People will say, use it even if you've not got high blood pressure and things like that. And it's almost like become like a prophylactic drug that people just take it just because.
The first thing I do whenever a drug comes to popularity is I always look at the content. And I have no issue with people taking telmisartan. And from what I can see, it's not capable of lowering your blood pressure to a dangerously low level, so there isn't an issue there. But it can be extremely kidney toxic in certain people. And it can't be used with, I think it's anti-inflammatories. So what I don't agree with is that people say, use this drug, use that drug, but don't tell the person, look, ideally with telmisartan for the first 3 weeks, you want to test your kidney function at least twice, which is what they do medically. If I go to the doctors and he puts me on telmisartan, I'll be in next week for a kidney function test, and I'll be in 2 weeks later for a kidney function test. And that's the bit that annoys me. That's the bit I have objection with. You can do what you want, and you can advise people to do whatever you want. That's your choice, and it's their choice whether they follow you. But you need to give them the full picture. And that's the bit that I'm uncomfortable with around telmisartan. When have you ever seen a coach advising telmisartan, but then also saying, look, there are some contras here. What's your kidney function like? Is it good? What's your last kidney reading been? Because that is a factor. Same with ramipril. Ramipril's another drug you've got to be wary around kidney function with as well. And as bodybuilders, there's a lot of guys whose kidney function, though passable, isn't brilliant. Now, telmisartan can improve kidney function. I've seen it happen. I know a couple of guys who have used it and their kidney function has improved massively from it. But there are people that it does the negative too. So it's more just a case of, if people want to promote various drugs, telmisartan, metformin, that's fine, no issue with it. But just give both sides of the story about the drug and its potential side effects so people can make informed decisions on it.
Going back to the HDL point.
Bleach up your ass, but sorry.
Going back to the HDL point, Dave, what would you advise someone to increase HDL if you've got a reading that's very low?
Well, the first thing is, so the drug that will damage HDL more than anything else is Primo.
God damn
Primo
it.
is very mild. Primo is mild in every other aspect apart from what it does to HDL. And part of that is its anti-estrogen mechanism that causes HDL to go so low. Mast will be second one on the corporate list, and then the rest of the anabolics are sort of pretty much alike. support-wise, you've got citrus bergamot, you've got krill oil. Now, fish oils tend to be rancid, tend to not be absorbed very well, whereas krill oil has a much better absorption rate, so it's a much better. You want to go one above than that, calanus oil. But it's not that readily available at the moment. But that's basically pre-krill. Calanus oil is very, very good for insulin sensitivity as well, and fat metabolism. And then you can look at Pauline therapy, which is 1 gram liposomal Vit-C, 5 grams lysine twice a day, AM, PM. You can look at stuff like slow niacin, and there's a few other things you can look at. Obviously, diet as well. And I think sometimes we forget that. We're so quick to go, what supplement?
Yeah.
When actually, you know what? If I just start eating a bit more of this and a bit less of that, I could probably do a lot of good there as well.
Interesting. Next one, boys.
How often do you see underdosed or fake anabolics in your blood testing?
It's weird. So it seems to go through fits and stages. So I would say just recently it's been there or thereabouts, but we've had a couple of periods of time when we've seen quite a lot of it. But the problem is with bloods. So testosterone obviously shows us testosterone. Tren shows us estrogen. EQ doesn't show at all. Mass doesn't show at all. Primo doesn't show at all. But it can show in the fact that estrogen is low. But like mass, chemically mass actually works more like a SERM than it does an AI. But in some people, it works like an AI. So it's not a clear cut. DECA will show us test. MPP really spikes test levels on a blood test. So it's not always clear. But I would say, if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say probably 15 or 20% are significantly shitly dosed, i.e. very, very low to what they should be. And then probably about another 15 or 20% are slightly, potentially under. And that's where it gets difficult because people metabolize drugs at different rates, of different clearance rates, body fat levels and various other aspects. It's like older men you tend to find can tolerate a higher TRT hormonally than younger men will. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I'd say probably about 15% where someone will say I'm on a Miller test and their test level's 6. So we get some very obvious ones where it's absolute garbage, but it's not super common.
Here's one for you, Dave. If you had to say, where would you expect 150 mg of testosterone to put someone?
Oh, good question.
150, I would expect him to put them above 25 into 29, 30-ish. I tend to find that about 120, 130 will put people 20 to 25, and that's where I like to put people. And then, 150 usually pushes them near the 29, 30 mark, so the more upper end of the 20s.
And how much variance do you see in bloods if people are using different injection frequencies? So, for instance, say someone's running 250 mg every Monday and they get their bloods done on a Monday morning, or if someone's splitting that dose Monday, Wednesday, Friday, would you expect?
So the difference mainly is that those that split will get a very similar result whenever they test. Whereas those that do a single dose protocol, there's a lot of variance depending on where they test. So you can see ranges be as literally over 10 nmol difference, depending if they're peak or trough from when they test. So the testing day in relation to injection becomes much more crucial when you're dealing with somebody who's doing a single injection protocol. If someone's doing 3 times a week, it doesn't really matter that much when you test because it's going to be fairly consistent.
Right, and you'd expect, and you wouldn't really see any variance if they got the bloods done the day after a jab.
You wouldn't see the effects of the jab if they. So, say for argument's sake, someone injected tomorrow morning at 7:00 in the morning and turned up the line for 9:00. It's potential that shot won't even register.
Right.
you don't see peak for about 24 to 36 hours. However, and we're seeing more of this, you can occasionally see ridiculously high peaks. And I've done a load of digging around this to try and work out what's going on. And I actually put a pinhead's worth of raw test in a blood testing vial with a sample of blood and sent it off to the lab. And it came back at over 520 nmol.
Wow.
So scar tissue or direct entry into the bloodstream can cause some very high peak readings post-injection. Because I had a few, and it was like, they're TRT patients, but it's coming back at 150 nmol.
I've seen that as
Oh,
well.
what the fuck is going on here? So retested them, and it came back fine. So CQ'd the lab, we reran all the controls. No, everything's fine, everything's perfect. The fuck is going on? And it's kept happening. And we started to realize that it was within a day or two of injection, you'd get this massive peak off. And I think it's, for a lot of people, it's scar tissue.
Right.
Scar tissue is disrupting the displacement of the oil, and some's entering the bloodstream in a much more concentrated rate than it would normally do, which is what's resulting in this weird spike for 24 hours.
Interesting. Yeah.
Dave, I got a question for you.
Okay.
If you had 3 months to put on the most amount of muscle that you possibly can, let's call it weight. What drugs are you going to use?
This is Riz clicking this as well. No one's really answered this in Riz's line.
Right, I would
no, it's for me.
I would go Rad 140.
Hey, really?
You're taking a piss, man.
How about I say?
And MK677.
15 pounds of water in 2 days.
I personally believe you can't beat medium test high decker oxy.
Simple as that.
I'm going to message my drug dealer.
I swear by that. If you want I don't know if you guys know, I do a podcast with Broderick every Friday as well now. And we've become quite good friends, and we have a lot of mutual respect for each other, but we definitely don't agree on everything. But the one thing he very much preaches is your steroids are a toolbox, and you need to pick the right tool for the right job. Now, I can get a screw in a wall with a hammer. It will make it work, but it isn't ideal. And that's very much like steroids. If I want an all-out bulk and mass, I'm going to be in the wet drug box. Yep. I'm looking for aromatizing drugs because estrogen is massive growth factor. Deca's anti-inflammatory. Deca won't cause too much bodybuilding stress in the sense of inflammation stress, and inflammation is going to be a killer for growth. Yes, you've got to watch BP. Yes, you've got to watch estrogen. But if you manage the drug correctly, it's a really effective growth compound, and you don't need to be a water baby. And then oxy, because oxys are just God. It's as simple as that.
A question, Dave, just to touch on what you just said. So these people, there seems to be a group of people at the moment that are obsessed with trying to keep their estrogen in range, even, no matter what drug cycle they're running in the off-season. That's a stupid ass thing to do, isn't it?
It's relative. Yeah, I mean, if you're sensitive to estrogen, then I understand the need. The way I look at estrogen is, and I think a lot of this is driven by this, I need to be IG usable. I need to be able to go on Instagram and not look a mess. Now, the way I look at it, as long as I'm protected against a physical deformity, i.e. gyno, anything else that estrogen causes, I can manage. So if it goes high and I get water retention, that's fine. I can deal with that. I can change that post. I don't have to worry about it. Obviously, gyno is a little bit more difficult to get rid of once it's there. But the other effects can all be reversible. So I generally build cycles with Novadex in as a preventive measure if we've got estrogen compounds in there. I'll test at week 4 to week 5. We're not going to be at peak estrogen, but we're going to be close enough to know where we're going. And then I'll set my estrogen management based on that.
So
once I know a client, but yeah, estrogen is a big growth factor. Estrogen protects your HDL. There's a lot of positives to estrogen And it's not a case of obliterating this or obliterating that. It's a case of optimizing those areas for you.
And that's where
as we already discussed. Yeah.
And that's
You know,
sorry, and that's where I was coming from there. People that don't get gyno, they don't really have any major issues from having their estrogen high, they still want to try and keep it in this range. And that's obviously that's restricting growth, isn't it, really?
If you want to grow, let your estrogen get as high as it can, as long as the negatives don't outweigh the positives. I mean, as we discussed earlier, I'm fucking 3.5 gram a test with no AI because I didn't have any problems from the estrogen and I grew like a bloody weed.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
There's a reason why Test and Deca is an old school drug that has a reputation for putting mass on.
Because it does.
Because it does. The 70s, 80s, and 90s bodybuilders didn't have freely available blood testing. They didn't have the science we have now. What they had is cause and effect. And all these reputations that drugs gained from those periods was gained out of them physically seeing it do that result in person after person after person. You know, in the same way I hate Tren as an off-season drug. I think it's idiotic. Because it's so harsh, it's so stressful. Right. Just to give an example, we've all had those cycles where they've been sweet as fuck. And we've grown and we've got strong, and it's felt like almost a daily occurrence. You know, the clouds have parted, the sun has shined down on us, the sea is parted as we walk past. Everything is going in our favour. We have no stress. Life's great. And we grow like weeds. And then we've all had those cycles where we've been arguing with the missus, work's been a twat, been fed up, pissed off. And though the dose of the drugs has been there, we just haven't seen the progress we'd normally see. And that's the impact stress can have. So why in a period when I want to grow would I be putting the most stressful generating drug there is in my system?
Because I love it.
Dusty, he never even used to use drugs in his off season. He used to just rely on food and training. Now Dusty has amazing genetics, but I don't like training in the off season. I think it's unnecessary.
Would you think if someone doesn't get on with current?
Let's say we use 100 meg alongside your test and EQ instead of using, say, 600 Deca.
Why would you want to use 100 meg of Tren?
Because I don't know.
So this is my problem, Dave.
That's a question based on.
I'll tell you why.
Go on, then.
So when we define our cycles, we would go a testosterone base, a DHT, and then a 19 norm. I don't get on with DECA or MPP. And this is actually a question I want to ask, because DECA and MPP should, in theory, be the same compound, but they just behave differently. But
they do, because the peak plasma levels are different, yeah. You've got to remember you've got a much higher concentration of nandrolone in MPP.
Whenever I use
you've got
MPP,
lower molecular weight.
I just don't feel good on nandrolone. I just don't get on with it. I just feel anxiety. I just feel this.
Okay, fair enough.
Just don't get on with it personally. So I just use training. I'll just use a very small dose.
My argument is I don't see the benefit from adding in 100 milligram of Tren. I don't see what that's going to add to the chemical mix that you couldn't get from a bit more test or a bit more EQ. The thing is, whether you like it or not, Tren is the compound we know the least about. It is the only compound that directly damages your kidneys. It is the only compound that has case studies for kidney failure. It is the only compound that's been shown to do severe neural damage. It has such a high cross receptor engagement. So Tren engages with cannabinoid receptors. It engages with progesterone receptor. It engages with the estrogen receptor. It engages, obviously, with the androgen receptor. Its stimulation with the neurochemicals, in the neuron activity it increases. It lowers neuron peptide Y. It engages with dopamine transport proteins, which is why dopamine drops through the floor, which is why prolactin goes up, which is why you use Keba, because it's a dopamine agonist to combat for that. It's got this wholesale sledgehammer approach in the body chemically. There's no doubt it's a very powerful and effective drug. but I just feel like you're taking a sledgehammer to bang in a drawing pin. So I would be more tempted to save Tren to where it's going to be most effective in transforming your physique, which is pre-comp.
Would there be a benefit, Dave, to the improved, obviously, nutrient partitioning in the off-season? Because that's obviously what the main reason I would apply Tren in the off-season, because that's the main benefit you'll get from it over any other compounds.
But I don't think its benefit is that much greater than any other compound. You want increased nutritional partitioning, use EQ.
Oh, I do.
Spike your hemo through the roof, and you'll have much better nutrient and oxygen transition.
How would it EQ?
What are your thoughts on EQ, Dave? We're a bit of a fan club on this side. We like EQ. Nobody else does.
I don't like it personally, but I recognise it can be useful. The only added complication with EQ is blood thickness. But other than that, and a lot of people find an increased appetite from EQ, which helps off season. Obviously, I do know some people that it can be quite liver stressing, and it does increase the liver weight. And I've seen when your liver gets stressed, your appetite will usually go to shit. So it does depend on how it affects you in that way. But if it keeps your appetite high and you manage blood thickness, I don't have an issue with EQ at all. It's very DECA-like without the mental problems that DECA can cause.
What causes that, Dave? I'm very much the same on MPP and Nandrolone in general. I'm quite a confident person in kind of pretty mentally stable most of the time. But when I touch that compound, I second guess everything. I'm riddled with anxiety. I just feel very different.
It's strange. It's strange that you get that from DECA and you don't get that from Tren.
Yeah, you're probably going to say I'm chatting shit when I say this as well. And I've mentioned it before, but you're a much smarter man than me.
I've done a gram and a half of Tren, mate, a week, and I had no issues with it whatsoever.
No, so I have ADHD, and I take like an epinephrine for it, a medication prescribed by the doctors. But it sounds very strange. When I started using medication, it did something to my brain, which is something I haven't experienced before, which is kind of cut out all the white noise to a degree. And you're probably going to say I'm chatting shit, but I swear to God, ever since I used Tren, it has a very similar effect to me. It almost like slows my brain down a touch. Now, when I come off it, I almost notice it immediately, like I'm on cruise now. I instantly lose that kind of like focus in the gym. Like you said, you get bored after 8 reps. That gets way more intense for me, where I can't really concentrate within those sets. But the second Tren's in, I'm tunnel vision. I'm in it. It's really weird.
So the situation with you is a little bit out of my pay grade because of the ADHD. So obviously the neurochemical situation in your brain is different. I wouldn't say it's fucked. I just say it's different. So the main mechanism in which Tren causes anxiety is that it increases neuron activity and cripples GABA's response. So as a result, you overthink. Quite literally overthinking. That relates to thing. DECA has a huge impact on dopamine and has a huge impact on dopamine transport protein. By the way, never do coke and DECA together.
Guilty.
Because you're just but so what happens, because obviously cocaine has an action around dopamine, you're just actually nullifying the effect of the cocaine by having DECA in your system.
Noted. I'll remember that.
So so you don't really want to be bothering with coke if you're on DECA. So Tren has this weird where it impacts all these different receptors. And it's possible that because you have ADHD, that it's stopping some of the irregular chemical actions that you have in your brain from actually being able to operate because that receptor is occupied by Tren.
That makes sense.
And so it's a constant. Instead of having a fluctuation, you've got a constant.
Yeah.
So you've got this constant plug-in instead of these peaks and waves that you're getting naturally because of your brain works slightly different to somebody else. Tren is an intense drug. The research mainly that's come out of Oslo has painted it in a particularly, I wouldn't say dark light, just in that this shit needs respecting.
Yeah.
Now, the observational stuff I've done and the sort of questionnaire research I've done showed that Tren users about 2/3 of Tren users suffered anxiety whilst on Tren. A third of the Tren users had continued anxiety post-use of Tren. And about 25-30% of Tren users experienced an extremely aggressive episode while using Tren.
I had them preach,
and that's not
a bad case study.
Yeah, so I said. So I think with you, it might be a case that it plugs in and stabilizes.
Yeah.
Some of the neurochemicals that you've got going on. It is a drug that's very understudied, and though there's pressure to do more with it, it's difficult because I can't take Hilly and give him 2 grams of Tren and see if he goes nuts.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just
all right.
Dick, you only get angry because you're a fucking gypsy, mate. That's why you're always angry.
That's true. Born to box, mate.
Dave can't really help gypsies either because medication's different. It affects your body differently.
I can say you're a caravan sheep.
Yeah, I'm fighting some dogs if you want. We can do that. I don't mind.
Yeah, I'll sell you a caravan. I've got some metal and all you can have if you want to come pick it up.
I'll be round in the transit tomorrow.
Dave, do you think because people always talk about Tren and Tren rage and how you're going to batter your missus, it makes people act in a certain way because people keep saying you're going to be a dick on Tren, so people are a dick.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a positive enforcement there mentally because you expect the drug to act a certain way. This has been shown with alcohol. Alcohol doesn't make people aggressive. It's actually the psychostimulus around alcohol and what we expect it to do. So all alcohol is ethanol. So why is it then that we have certain beers nicknamed wife beater? But drinking a glass of red wine is romantic.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's all the same shit. It's ethanol. But it's that stimulus that we've been brought up with, that alcohol will do this, it will do that, and the person that drinks Stella act the twat is going to be a prick. And so there's definitely some pre-programming around Tren in that you will act a certain way if you use Tren. There's no denying that, but there's also some very real observational of people acting twats on Tren as well, more so than other drugs. But I know people that act twats just on test.
What sort of dosage would you run Tren at, Dave? If you were prepping someone, what sort of dosage would you take that up?
I'm very conservative with it and usually stick between the 200 and 400.
Yeah, same here.
Powerlifter wise, I tend to go ace, and it'll be sort of 75, somewhere around there, 50, 75 ace 3 times a week. But I keep it quite low. I mean, I wasn't impressed with it personally. I felt I got more off Deca than I did off Tren from a point of view of muscular wise, but that was me.
How high did you go?
1.5 grams.
To be fair, we had Tofton on last. We had Tofton on last week. He's running his Tren at 700 megs in the off season.
Yeah, I know. Matt's Matt. He does his own thing, doesn't he? He's never been one to sort of run by everybody else.
I wanted to bring that up, actually, off the back of that podcast. He mentioned he loves using DHB. So I wanted to sort of ask what your thoughts on DHB was. As
it's a powerful drug. It is a powerful drug. I find DHB a little bit unpredictable. So I've seen a wide range of reactions to DHB. And I've found it a little bit difficult to nail down, right, you do this and we're going to get this. It seems to be a little bit different in every person. It's a strong drug, and it definitely has some negative impacts. But they do seem to vary massively from person to person. So it's something I wouldn't rule it out for bodybuilding, but I would be more sort of off-season with it. I mean, Matt put up his pre-comp cycle, and he's obviously got his reasons for using it, and I don't know what they are because I've not spoken to him about it, but it seemed unusual to me.
he said it was phenomenal for his blood glucose management. I think that's what he said. He's seen a positive impact from. He does use Lantus, but he just said that since using DHP, his ability to manage his blood glucose is just far better.
Seems to stay leaner. He said, and he could grow. He didn't get that wall where you just seem to not get any further.
So he's
Okay,
talking about
fair
it in
enough.
an off-season setting more so, or like transition period.
And Dan Bastic said to me he noticed a similar sort of thing that Matt did.
Okay.
Well, Dan
There's
said
so
that
many-
like way back last year, and that's where I like sparked my interest. But then I prepped, so I couldn't really get to use it.
I've just ordered some now.
I've just started 225 mg a week last week to see what it does.
Well, I'd be interested to see what you feedback from it. My gut says there are other ways to manage your insulin sensitivity that don't require using a steroid for it. If you're using that steroid for other choices and that's the fringe benefit, fine, get it, not a problem. If you're using that steroid solely for that, I'd be a little bit more, I'm not sure this is necessary here, you know what I mean?
For me, it was the only steroid I hadn't played with. The only reason I avoided it when it became a bit popular was because the PIP was meant to be horrendous. But now there's a couple of labs that are
Yes, DHP is very prone to crashing.
Yes.
So as a result, even though it looks liquid in the vials, sometimes you'll have crystallization in there, which hurts like a bitch when you inject. That's one of the reasons why it's pipped so bad.
Yeah, but theirs was a little bit crushed when I got it, when I just sat it in boiling water for about an hour, and so far, but I've been mixing it with other stuff, so I've been mixing it with Masteron test, and so far, the jabs are not bad at all, so far, touch wood.
I don't know why you just can't be natural. I don't understand this requirement for drugs. It just seems silly to me.
I'd be bored if there was no drugs, Dave, you know that. Very bored. Very bored.
Yeah, it's definitely a compound I've got a lot of respect for, and it's definitely a compound that you're going to be lower dose rather than higher dose.
I thought that.
Your big hitters really are Tren, DHB, Ment. Deca sort of sits in a bit of a weird place because though it's a good off-season size drug, it's not overly impacting physically, but as two of you have experienced, it can play with you mentally. And when you use Deca to the level that I used it, it does fuck your memory. That is definite. It damages neuropeptide Y. And then you start getting into your sort of secondary level of compounds like EQ and Mast, and tests that are a bit more all-rounder and generally well-tolerated. And then you start getting into Primo, which apart from the HDL issue, is incredibly mild.
The strength
as
of
an
that
anabolic,
too, the memory.
Tren, it's definitely possible. I'm not aware of it, but it's definitely possible.
A lot of the studies cranking out now seem to be the nandrolone that everyone seems to be putting out around the effects it has on the neurological side of things.
Yeah, it's a weird thing as well because Deca's been popular and used for decades. I mean, your standard drug cycle was test Deca Debo. You go back to the 80s and that's it. That's what everybody did in the off-season, test the Deca. And then you've even got like your Robbie Robinson that did Deca only. And there was no ever feedback of anyone having issues with it mentally. That seems to be more of a modern phenomenon. I don't know if it's because doses are so much higher in general now than they used to be, because there's no doubt they are. Don't get me wrong, there was people back then that did use big doses, but, in general, doses are higher than they used to be. So I don't know if there's anything about that, or it's the duration of exposure to the drug that's creating problems in people, or if there's actually a physical difference between the Deca of the 80s and the Deca of the 2020s. I don't know.
Did you say
but it
Robbie
seems
Robinson,
to be something
Dave?
that's... Yes.
He's a good example of someone whose head's absolutely fucking scrambled now, so we can kind of say that MPP does do that.
Okay. Yeah, he's well known for popularizing Deca-only cycles.
Oh, interesting.
But a lot of these guys didn't use particularly high doses.
That's actually one of the questions I got, Dave, is in your experience coming from obviously when you started to now, what are the differences between past cycles and modern cycles in terms of dosages and compounds used?
It went through a period of escalating. You've always had the outliers. You've always had those that were ridiculously low users. Sean Tavernier was a ridiculously low user. That fucker would grow sniffing plankton. I'm telling you, genetics that boy has are incredible. So Sean was very low drug user. Dusty Hanshaw's another one that was a very low drug user. But then you've got people like Sean Davis, who pushed the boundary a bit with the drugs in that period of time. Ian wasn't silly, but he was still a bit of a disciple of Borison. But he used to take what Borison said and then cut it in half. And use half of what Borison suggested. And then in more modern times, we saw this peak towards 5 gram being the sort of circa mark that anyone who was going to be anybody was going to be using. You know, Luke went there, JP went there. Well, quite a lot of people went there and went there on a regular basis. And then there's been a shift in the last 2 or 3 years, and they've all come down, and they're all now in the 2, 2.5, sort of 3 maybe range. I can't speak for JP these days. I don't know what he's doing. Illy would have a better idea of that. But I know, like, Luke was dropping into the 2 and 2.5 gram ranges for a long time. I know James is quite low relative in his dosing. And a lot of the guys have knocked it down. And strangely, I was speaking to Scott this week, and he was saying that on the message boards days, the UK always said, first cycle, 400-500 mega test. Where in America, it was 750. So they were pushing higher doses back then. He says, and then there was a point where the UK went past.
Of course.
And America calmed down, and then the UK's calmed back down a bit now. And I think we've had a bigger shift in recent years towards being health conscious. And there's some truth in that, and there's some bullshit in that. So, you know, everybody get your bloods. But the amount of times I've seen blood work and people have then justified that blood work with bullshit because they don't want to accept the fact that actually that blood work isn't that good. Or that's just because of this, or that's just because of that. And the cognitive dissonance you see around that is quite ridiculous. But in general, yes, doses have probably come down a little bit. But the amateur doses have come up. So even top-end athletes have come down, but amateur doses have come up, and they've all sort of sandwiched in the middle. So now you've got pros running 2.5, 3 gram, but then you've got guys in their second comp doing men's physique running 2.5, 3 gram. And there seems to be this match now where everyone's sort of sitting in the middle.
But do you think, Dave, once you've got that muscle there from your 5 grams of use, you can then maintain later in your career on less?
To a possibility, there is also an element of you're going to need a certain anabolic load to progress whatever because you're already at a certain level. You know, if I've got a 1 litre Fiesta, I'm going to need a certain amount of fuel. But if I swap that for a V8, I'm going to need a lot more fuel to go the same speed.
Yeah. And,
I'm not going any faster.
And even Jordan touched on this on his forum in his journal. He said he thought he could regain a lot of his tissue because muscle memory and whatnot on lower doses than he had. And then after a period of time, he was like, I was wrong. I've just wasted time. My doses are going to have to get back up. Maybe not as an extreme level, but close to where they are if I want that tissue back. Just because I just think that follows on from what we're discussing.
Yeah, very much so. And there is and I think a lot of people sort of are a bit scared to be truthful and honest around doses now because we have this big health push. But the reality is you're not stepping on an Olympia stage on 700 mg total.
No.
It ain't fucking happening. I don't care who you are. I don't care how good your genetics are. You're not getting there, not these days. You know, you're going to have to use drugs. But it's making sure that your dose is relative to you and where you are. And the big problem we have is that, obviously, people rely on drugs for progress because they don't want to do the work in the other departments. And that's the reality of it. And you can judge that if you want. I personally don't. It's just the truth. You know, there's a lot of people using drugs, using more than they need to, because they just can't generate the intensity in the gym or they just can't follow the diet as well as they should do. Bodybuilding isn't a lifestyle for a lot of people. It's just a hobby that they pick up and
Yeah.
when they want to. They put down at Christmas, they put down when they go on holiday, they put down every Friday and Saturday night when they go out on the piss. But bodybuilding in the 80s was a lifestyle. It was a commitment. It was a way you lived. And though there are people that are like that now, there's a large number of people that aren't, which is why we see much elevated drug use in amateurs. The biggest area of probably drug usage growth is females.
Yeah.
That's where we see drug usage growing the most, and a lot of it is around so-called TRT protocols and stuff like this that just are bullshit. They're just excuses to use gear.
I was just going to say that. Talk on females using testosterone, Dave.
So androgen deficiency in females is a very common problem. It's well documented, but it affects women that are in their 40s and 50s. It's not really a young girl's problem. If someone genuinely has low testosterone and they've not tested when they've just come off a bit of a dieting phase, or they've come off a cut, or they've come off a comp, when their hormones are trashed anyway because they've been very low body fats. And female hormone production is very fat sensitive. Body fat levels have a massive effect on female hormones. So if they're off season and they genuinely have low test, I have no issue and I have no problem with a female using testosterone in a therapeutic manner. What I have issue with is females that are reporting test levels of 0.7 being told that that is low and they need to go on TRT, and then they're reporting levels of 5 and more. Because that long-term is going to cause major problems. And we're going to have a lot of girls, I believe, I hope I'm wrong, but I believe we're going to have a lot of girls in 5 or 6 years when their bodybuilding is done that are barren as fuck.
Yeah, I agree.
Because of the test supplementation that they've been doing for this period of time and the damage it's done to development and growth of polyps and such like that, within their internals. PCOS, when you look at the levels that a lot of the girls are running at, they are PCOS levels. They are polycystic ovary levels. They are high. But it's a bit like TRT. I believe TRT should be TRT. I don't agree with the sports TRT. I don't agree with all those terminologies. I don't have an issue with you running your test at 35 or 40 nmol in your cruise period if you want to, but don't call it TRT because it's not. It's a low cycle, or you can call it a cruise dose if you want, fine. But I don't like the use of the word TRT because it normalizes it. And then somebody who's not experienced goes, well, that's what TRT is. It's 200 megatest and 100 megamast. No, it's not. So my hang-ups around the honesty of the industry and the fact that we dress things up with stupid bullshit to try and justify what we're doing because we don't want honesty. So, well, the truth is, I've actually got a bit of a drug problem here, and there is times through my usage where I have no shame in admitting I was addicted, and my thought process was not how can I improve my training, how can I be better with my diet. My improvement was quite simply, what extra drugs can I take? And if that's your thought process, you're starting on the edge of a very slippery road that you need to be careful with. Because, and I do it deliberately sometimes just because I'm a cunt and I like doing things like this, but I'll suggest to people just stop using. And it'll be like, what? And you get this list of excuses as to why they must continue to use steroids. I don't give a fuck if you want to use steroids, use them. It's your choice, it's your body, it's your life. But just try and be honest about it. Yeah. The real reason you want to use is you're dependent on them because you identify with your physique. And as a result, you feel your physique is tied to your drug use. So if you lose your drug use, you lose your physique, you lose your identity. And that's a very common scenario with a lot of people. That's not necessarily terrible, but you need to be aware of where you are with it. That's my only point on all that.
It's an interesting question, Dave. So TRT is obviously keeping it within the legitimate range. Is there any issue sitting at 35, 40 if all of your blood markers are fine? for prolonged
No, if so, this is the point. If you can manage that level, and this is what I said about older gentlemen seem to be able to manage high doses a little bit better. If you can manage that level and it's not creating problems with your prostate, you're not seeing your HDL slam through the floor, you're not seeing your blood thickness go through the roof, fine. Yeah, no problem. This is my whole point about all of it. It's just about being honest, being aware of the pluses and minuses, and making your decisions and choices around that information. And even if you ran at 40 and your estrogen was high and your PSA was starting to creep up, as long as you're accepting of what you're doing, who am I to judge?
Agreed.
You know, it's not my place to say you're wrong, as long as you are aware of the cost you're paying for what you're doing. And that's because I get people through here every fucking week. In fact, I've got a guy coming tomorrow who I've told there's a strong chance he will now be TRT dependent, and he's absolutely devastated by it. Now, to us lot, it's like, fuck it, just take a shot test a week. It's not a big problem. But for him, it's a huge life-changing event because he never realised that were the consequences of what he was doing, pissing about with test. And if he'd have had that information earlier on, he would have probably done things differently. I mean, I think also some of it is a fear thing, and once he realises exactly what he's got to do, it won't be that bad a thing for him. But, you know, for some people, it's a big deal.
Mm.
And, you know, I mean, when I was 24 and full of gear, I had no consideration about whether I wanted kids or didn't want kids, or whether I was damaging myself or not damaging myself, because I didn't know anything about it. It was completely ignorant. My first 4 or 5 years of usage, I didn't know what EQ was. I didn't know what shutdown was. I didn't know about estrogen management. I literally went to my supplier and said, now bear in mind, it was all pharma back then. Good old days. None of you were old enough to remember that shit.
He is.
But I just go to my supplier and it'd be like, what, you got this any good? Oh, I've got this in. This is really good. I'll run that for 6 weeks. It was ridiculous. And how I came out of that relatively unscathed, apart from fuck testosterone levels, was a miracle. But some people can fuck themselves up very, very quickly. So, yeah, I don't stand in any judgment. You can do what the fuck you want. You can run 10 gram a test if you want. Just don't blame anyone else if it goes Pete Tong. Yeah, because you're responsible for that. The gear, steroids ruined my life. Well, yeah, they crept up when you were asleep and fucking climbed into you. They did the bollocks. You ruined your life, you dickhead.
Dave, are you still running your pillars course?
I do, yes. I'll give you a discount. You can have 10% off. There you go.
Brilliant.
What's the
Hilly knows how tight I am. I don't give discounts on anything.
what is the training stuff that you're going to do next year as we wrap this up?
Well, it's this year now.
Sorry, this year. You're right. Good job. You're here on the.
Yeah.
That must be taking that.
So basically, it's a day's program. The first one's going to be at Ultraflex in Rotherham, provisionally looking at the 4th of Feb. So it will be 249 quid, which I know is a decent whack of money, but that's your gym entry, which is 15 quid anyway, and that's your lunch provided by the cafe that they have in there, which is all healthy shit. We're going to do the first hour and a half theory-based. So we're going to look at hinges, levers, and load points and why they're important. We're going to look at muscle shortening, range of motion. We're going to look at posture. We're going to look at rep tempo, explosive, different types of reps, and basically everything around the mechanisms on paper of what we do. Then we're going to go down into the gym. It's limited to 10 people because I need to be able to get hands-on with everybody. And we're going to do the big 3. So we'll do bench, squat, and dead. Then we'll break for lunch. And then after lunch, we'll go through specific exercises. And it's just about understanding how the body moves in a movement so you can maximize the stress on the muscle you want to give it. Some exercises, and it's surprising how subtle changes can make a massive difference to what you do. So one that surprises a lot of people is biceps and how you can accentuate and change which head of the bicep you activate by changing which finger you squeeze the bar with.
I've watched that video.
And how bar positioning.
So did I.
Yeah.
I've watched that video, yeah. Talking about like where you
and
put
how,
the dumbbell.
Yeah, where you put the dumbbell in the palm and how it changes the loading in the bicep.
Yeah.
back is much more complex, but like on a lat pull down, very few people actually pull down in the lat. What they do is they start with a lat and then they move on to the trap and the teres major and minor and all the rest of the upper muscles. Because what happens is they do that instead of that. So it's things like that. And it is so we spend then probably 4 hours going through actual exercise technique. And then at the end, we do working sex intensities. So that's when I will actually make them train to true failure.
And are you going to run these?
And that sounds silly, but the amount of people that don't know where true failure is because they've always failed mentally rather than physically.
Are you going to run these across the year? That's not just the one. You're going to run a couple of these.
Yeah, if it goes well, I enjoy that sort of stuff. So if it goes well, I'd like to do them quite regularly and at different parts of the country.
I'm only asking in detail because I can't, to anybody listening, can't express enough how important that would be to someone if they haven't truly trained with someone that knows how to train hard. The stuff that I took away from training with Dave when I was very young is and learning how to train hard. It is vital. Jordan says the same thing. Anybody Cooper does. James says, anybody that is at the peak of their game cannot express enough how important it is to take the chance to train with people that actually know not only how to train, but how to train fucking hard. It is something that changes your entire bodybuilding. And I personally think it's something that 90% of people are missing. And the problem is, out of that 90%, 50% are so-called coaches. And if they don't know truly how to train hard, then they can't express that, which is just why I'm asking this in detail.
I spent 8 years taking every opportunity I could to train with every individual I could train with, whoever they were. Trained with Terry Fisher, trained with Ian Harrison, trained with Mike Quinn, trained with Marianne. She was fucking hard trainer. Billy Payne, Kev Taylor. Kev was nuts as well. But different powerlifters, anyone or everyone. So I could just take a little bit away from that person. And then I spent probably 3 years, and quite literally 3 years, playing around with training styles and techniques and different things and trying different things to come up with what now is my training style. I mean, people say, how many sets of reps do you do? I don't count them.
That's my response.
I used to be, but I don't count them anymore.
I never count reps.
I just do failure. Failure at 2 points with 2 different weights. That's it.
Well, it's like I used to hold a structure. Now it's very instinctive. So it's like, I'm warm now. I've done enough. I know I'm warm. But I still build up. Even if I was squatting 8 plates in my heaviest set, I'd start with an empty bar, then a plate, then 2 plates, then 3 plates, then 4 plates, then 5 plates, then 6, 7, 8. And then 8's my working set. But it's also, I think where a lot of people break down is you say to somebody, what's the object? Right, okay, I want you to do a set of 10 reps with 140 kilos on bench. And then I'll say to them, what's the objective of that set? Then they'll say, well, to get 10 reps with 140. Or this is your working set. So what's the objective of that set? Well, to get 10 reps with 140. No, it's not. It's to go to a point where you fail under control. The reps aren't what's important. The damage and stimulation to the muscles what important. There's no point going to 8 reps in good form and then bouncing 2 shitty ones out. You know, we're not going to lose the sight of what we're trying to do, which is maintain stress on the pec, in order to get a couple of reps out to make this magic number that we've made up. We'll go to the point where we fail, but we fail when the load is targeted on the chest, not bringing secondary muscles in to try and cheat our way through it because we want to make this magic number. But it's difficult for people to conceptualize what failure is or what the muscle feels like, so they use numbers all the time and then get lost in the numbers.
Yeah.
And logbooks, I'm not a fan of logbooks because it's like you can't increase weight and load every fucking set and maintain form. Because what happens is your progression becomes, not in everybody, I mean, there are, and we spoke about JP a lot tonight, but JP is a prime example of someone who uses logbooks, but is disciplined enough to maintain what he's got to do. Yeah. But most people, they'll get to the point where it's 7, right, so this week I've got to make 9 reps with this weight, right, 7 strict. They know they're going to fail on 8, so they bounce 8 so they can just jerk out 9 and they've made their target, but you haven't. And the more they do that, the more they start to regress. And the more injuries start to creep in because they're not actually training the target muscle, they're training everything fucking else.
It's a conversation I always have with clients all the time. Like, people just can't grasp the person who's the best in the gym is the person who can fail the fastest and most efficiently. That's what the new trainers don't understand. They need a number to log on to and go, I need to get to 10, 20 reps. But ultimately, there's a video that floats around of Big Ramy doing a hack squat, and he has like one plate aside on. You watch his quad fire, he fails 8 reps. The dude's got 34-inch legs. It's mental, but it's just being able to engage the neurological connection with the legs to make them fail that quickly, you know?
It's about making... So there's 3 elements involved in the lift: bone, tendon, muscle. As a bodybuilder, we want to get rid of bone and tendon, and we just want muscle. Very hard to do. Powerlifters want to use everything because they want the muscle to do the least work possible so they get the most strength out of their mechanism. As bodybuilders, because we're trying to stimulate as much muscle stress as possible, we want to minimize the engagement of the other 2 factors. And I think that's where people go wrong. They don't focus on the end goal, which is stimulation. They focus on the end goal, which is a number.
Yeah.
Rep, set, weight. And that's where they go wrong. Well, you can progressive overload, but it can just be that you did half a rep more.
Yep.
Or you did a bit better control on the reps that you did. You know, progressive overload doesn't necessarily mean numbers. Progressive overload means you've progressed in the stress factors you've placed upon the muscle. That's it.